Dyer wave.
3.
Our anthropology is not derived by human psychology or, empirical data from MIT or something like this. It's derived from the revealed aspect of what we see in Christology. Welcome. How y'all doing? What's up, y'all? We want to make sure we have good sound quality this time around.
Yeah, how's it sound?
You sound good to
I can
me.
bring
You sound...
the microphone closer if you want me to.
You sound crystal clear as a crystal clear Pepsi or a Zima. How do I sound?
Oh my gosh, did you just say Zima?
You're crystal clear like a Zima or a crystal
You sound
clear
great.
Pepsi. Good.
By the way, I'm going to get some speakers so I don't have to wear these mouse ears. I know it makes me look silly, but...
Welcome. Thank you, Father Deacon Dr. Ananias. Always a pleasure to have my favorite deacon on to cover these debate reviews. These have really been a success. The audience really likes these. They're a lot of fun to do. This one's kind of long, so I want to go ahead and get started. We may not make it through the entire debate. We'll see. I don't know how long you have, Father Deacon. I know we're a little late tonight, but what do you want to set us off with? Maybe you could speak a little bit before we start the debate in terms of how, as an Orthodox person, do you think the transcendental argument could be used? I mean, isn't this a Calvinist doctrine? You can't use a Calvinist doctrine. What would you say to somebody who said something like that?
I believe that when you read the Fathers, that what you do see is a presuppositional type of argument. And I contrast that to, let's say, kind of natural theology that embraces, let's say, a particular metaphysics or gives an autonomy to philosophy and or
So, Father Deacon,
nature in their minds is in.
Can I pause you?
Are we losing me?
Getting a really bad signal from you. Could you maybe turn the camera off and just do audio?
Mm-hmm. Let me stop video. Yeah, it could be my my signal in this room. Let me try. How's the audio sound?
To me, you sound good. Audience, does his audio sound good?
So it's the routers, the wireless routers in the other room, and it's getting bad signal through the walls, through the office, so I apologize.
It's okay. Is the sound good, guys?
Okay, let's
and we'll
see.
get going.
Sounds great, they said.
Okay. You want to do that question again?
Yeah. What I was saying is that I believe when you read through the Fathers, what you see is what we would call a presuppositional argument, and that has to do a type of presuppositional apologetics, and that has to do with where are your starting points and foundations. What you don't see is what you see later develop kind of in the West, that a pretended autonomy given to man's own reason or the world, and then you can reason up to God. And what you see in the order of our theology is you begin with faith. Faith is what makes known and allows us to contemplate the ages, as scriptures say. So now, as far as what a transcendental argument is, that's simply, kind of a formal way that develops later in philosophy to kind of express what's I would say is going on in kind of a presuppositional approach. So now the reformers that we're talking about, like Van Til and Bahnsen, they're known for coming up with what's called the transcendental argument for the existence of God. But if you read their works, they didn't come up with this by themselves. They were actually reading through the fathers. They all actually say that the fathers are using. So if anything, it's our argument, of which I would argue that they've corrupted in some sense. And as you know, Jay, you and I would argue that in the end, because of their paradigm, it doesn't work from a Calvinist point of view.
Right.
But they get some things correct about that, not because they made it up or not because the correct things are reformed in nature, but because they're orthodox.
Right. Yeah,
That's
I mean, if Aristotle, Porphyry, Plotinus can all make true statements and true arguments, which everyone agrees that they can, there's no reason why somebody in a Calvinist tradition also can't have a good point or a good argument, right? I mean, it's just simply not the case. Right. It's a genetic fallacy to say that because it comes from, or some argument is even found in Bahnsen or Van Til, that it's therefore evil because that's a fallacy, a genetic fallacy. So because it comes from them, I mean, by that logic, we can't use anything that Aristotle said, right? Which is absurd.
Correct.
Now, this one, everybody's familiar, as we said, with the Bahnsen-Stein debate. That's probably the most famous Bahnsen debate. And, of course, it's famous for good reason, right? Bahnsen does a really excellent job of, in a hostile setting, an atheist setting at a secular university in California, really putting Gordon Stein on the ropes and questioning him about the status of immaterial objects. And really, this causes Gordon Stein to melt down because, as we so often see, people in the scientism crowd, as you saw this week with my tweets in regard to Richard Dawkins, right? Dawkins was making similar types of really basic philosophical mistakes and not even realizing he was doing it. And, we had some pretty good traction, some from the replies to Dawkins. But this debate is lesser known. There's a handful of Bahnsen debates that ended up getting into the annals of being recorded, and there's the George Smith debate, there's the Gordon Stein debate, there's the Tabash debate, and the Tabash debate is actually an overlooked gem. So if you're ready, we'll go ahead and start, and we'll let me know when you want me to pause if you have a comment, and we'll go back and forth.
Should I start the video again, or you think that's going to cause a problem? Or I can just shut it off if I pause. It's up to you guys.
It's just really lags bad, and it's really low quality, and you freeze.
Okay.
So, I mean, you can try, and then if we have problems, you can go back to video. Your roboting is the thing. Robo-deacon.
I was right now.
Robo-deacon.
Robo-deacon.
You can be a culturally appropriate robo-deacon for the new AI megachurch that we'll create. We can have a robo-deacon. Are you there?
I'm looking on the thing. Yeah, it sounds good right now. I'll put it on. If it does it again, I'll just shut off because I feel like I'm not real. I feel like I'm an NPC.
Maybe you're not.
Just black.
I mean, there is a delusion called Cotard's delusion where people think that they are either dead or not real. So, could be. That's a real thing.
Let's begin.
All right, here we go.
Answering the question, does God exist? In the affirmative will be Dr. Greg L. Bahnsen. Dr. Bahnsen has a PhD in philosophy from the University of Southern California. In addition, he is a member of the American Philosophical Society, a member of the Society of Christian Philosophers, and a member of the Evangelical Philosophical Society. Dr. Bahnsen was the first person to receive 2 simultaneous degrees from Westminster Theological Seminary, a Master's of Divinity degree and a Master's of Theology degree. Presently, Dr. Bahnsen lives in Southern California. There, he is a teaching pastor of Bayview Orthodox Presbyterian Church. In addition, he is a resident scholar of the Southern California Center for Christian Studies. He is the author of 5 scholarly books which deal with the following topics: ethics and practice, the theory of knowledge, and Christian apologetics. All of these topics that Bahnsen specializes in are directly relevant to tonight's debate. Dr. Bahnsen is a veteran of numerous debates with such broad topics as religious truth, socio-political application, and other fine topics.
I'm going to fast forward this.
As one can see, all the major...
Yeah, we know. Everybody has degrees. We know.
Thank you, Mark and Dan. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. The resolution before us tonight is in the form of a question: does God exist? I would like to preempt my remarks by saying that just recently,
I guess this is
I
Tabash.
have learned the correct pronunciation of Mr. Tabash's name.
No, this is another moderator.
So please forgive me if it seems segment 3. Segment 3 will consist of speech and debate.
First place, I think it's a great privilege that...
Okay, so Bahnsen's going to have the opening statement.
I would now like to invite Dr. Bahnsen to present his 15-minute opening statement. And until we have heard the last word on this issue tonight, may clear minds prevail. Will you please welcome Dr. Bahnsen?
By the way, Father Deacon, can I ask beforehand, had you heard this debate before, or is this new to you?
This is new to me.
Okay.
And then Mr. Tabash.
I might have. Forgive me.
What's that?
I think I actually have.
Okay.
I remember now.
Thank you very much for coming out. It's really great to be here. I'm glad to engage in this debate because, in the first place, I think it's a great privilege that that God, by His grace, has called me to believe in Him, and I trust that I might honor Him in what I'm doing. I am glad to be here as well because I've enjoyed reading what I've learned about my opponent, and I think this will be a good exchange. Maybe we'll have even a better one when we go out to eat afterwards.
I'm going to grab my coffee.
But when I found out that he was an alumnus of UCLA, I was all the more glad that I was asked to come to this debate because I'm really sore about losing out on the Rose Bowl. Tonight's debate is kind of like going to a movie after it started, say midway through the screening of the movie. In order to understand and assess the conflict or the struggle that you're presently seeing, you have to catch up with the background that you haven't seen, but which explains and actually develops what's now going on presently on the screen. And I think that's true about tonight's debate as well. You really can't understand and evaluate what you see and hear up here until you look into the unspoken beliefs, which are really the context of what's going on. There is a crucial and a determinative intellectual background to tonight's public conflict between the theist and the atheist, a background which involves radically different underlying philosophies about reality, knowledge, human value, and conduct. On the one hand, you have a view that says the world is at base matter and motion. And over against that, a view that says the material world is actually the creation and is controlled by a sovereign and all-knowing personal God. These different ultimate perspectives, or worldviews, are the context in terms of which each proponent reasons, what he takes to be relevant, what method and standards of reasoning he employs, how evidence is recognized, how it's assessed, and how it's applied. Mr. Tabash has a fundamental philosophy of life, an underlying worldview, which he brings as background baggage to the debate tonight. So do I. We each have, as yet, unspoken beliefs about the nature of reality, human experience, the possibility and methods of knowing, and how we should live our lives. And when all is said and done, these two opposing worldviews will guide and always be at work in our respective arguments or our appraisals of evidence. For example, atheists can be undaunted when Christians show the historicity of Christ's resurrection, pointing to it and saying, see, there's a miracle. But you see, given the atheist naturalistic presuppositions, he believes that someday, or he can believe someday, scientific explanation of that event is theoretically possible, in which case then it's not a miracle. On the other hand, theists are not dissuaded when atheists point to the evidence of natural disasters or children suffering in the world.
This is an important beginning point that I'd like to highlight, which...
By the way, Jay, I'm just gonna win you over because my whiteboard's
whiteboard. Who's got the bigger whiteboard?
larger than yours.
You went to...
It's totally impractical. I can't use it. It's so big, but
you went to Office
I
Depot
win.
and you were like,
yeah, go ahead.
I need a bigger whiteboard than my friend. Do you have those?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that Bahnsen is making a very lucid point that we often make right out of the gate, which is to say that apologetics and the transcendental argument is based on a perspective of worldviews, right? That worldviews are what govern our interpretation of all phenomena, all events. So we all have a specific paradigm, even if we don't think we do. Nevertheless, we do come from some given view that we have about philosophy, about metaphysics, about ethics, right? About epistemology. Even if we think we're completely agnostic, that itself is still some kind of position. And in regard to evidentialism, Bahnsen is making a great point that the dispute between the atheist and the Christian is not going to be determined by piling up evidences. Evidences have a place, but evidences are going to be interpreted within a paradigm, and that's a crucial, excellent point that Bahnsen is making here, and that's why it really just doesn't work to try to show all day long. Look, it's possible that Jesus rose from the dead. Here's the possibility that he rose from the dead. It's not going to matter to the atheist because he's just going to interpret that as something within his paradigm that has a naturalistic explanation.
So it's good he starts off.
Yeah, he's starting off preemptively, kind of removing any kind of quote evidentialist approach or neutrality approach that Tabash will probably try to appeal to.
You see, given their presuppositions, God has a morally sufficient reason for ordaining such events, and thus they are not contrary to his goodness and his power, given those presuppositions. In both cases, the underlying worldview is the controlling factor in the reasoning and the conflicting conclusions to which the proponents come. And thus progress can be made in the atheist-theist debate only if we recognize that we all have, as it were, come into the movie midway. And we must confront the philosophical background to our disagreements. Tonight's debate comes down to a choice between the conflicting worldviews in terms of which we will be reasoning and arguing tonight. Now, I believe that the existence of the Christian God is an objective reality which is rationally provable. Please note four things, though, about what I've just said. First of all, notice that I am defending Christian theism specifically. I don't believe there is any unambiguous and coherent notion of theism in general. I'll be defending the Christian version of theism. Secondly, our concern here tonight is with the question of the truth of atheism or of theism, not with psychological motivations, not with subjective desires or the social function.
This is fascinating because if you've heard this debate, this is precisely what Tabash will rely on. Tabash will rely on complaints and emotional appeals and psychological motivations for beliefs and totally avoid the question of the truthity or falsity of the topic. And that's again, one of the reasons why Bahnsen was one of the best debaters of the 20th century.
And good point. We're not arguing for generic theism.
Yeah, exactly.
In the personal character of theist or atheist. The truth about God, either way, and the truth about devotees to theism or atheism, again, either way, may be happy or it may be sad. It may be useful or it may be counterproductive. It may be corrupting or it may be ennobling, but regardless, whatever the truth is, it remains the truth. Thirdly, remember that an argument need not be accepted by everyone for it to be nonetheless conclusive.
Yes.
We must obviously distinguish between proof.
Do you want to say something on that?
So we get a lot of this kind of confusion that, well, if God could be proven, then everybody would believe it. And obviously that's not true. It goes back to your point too, that there's a difference between, you know, motivations to believe something, that it's actually irrelevant whether the conclusion's true or not, or the argument's good. Yeah. So, I mean, just because, you know, if the whole world just up and decided like 2 + 2 isn't 4, or I guided them through the Pythagorean Euclid's proposition 47, book 1, that the areas of some of the squares on the sides is equal to the area of the square on the hypotenuse, and that you actually do approve. Whether people accept that or not has nothing to do with the validity and soundness of the argument. So good that he pointed that out. But we see that today, don't we? People are like, well, I'm not convinced. And you know what I always say to people that say, I'm not convinced? That sounds like a you problem, not a me or the argument problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a sufficient reply to the question.
Persuasion. Personal persuasion is subjectively qualified. Proof is not. But you see, something can exist. For instance, a cancer for which the doctor has proof. Something can exist even though a person is unpersuaded that he has cancer and even offers reasons, maybe, you know, avidly reasons against the possibility that he has cancer. We're dealing here with proof, not persuasion tonight. And fourthly, many hearers need to disabuse themselves of an old canard that goes something like this. Faith is believing what you know ain't true. Or faith takes over where reason leaves off. Faith is not something that stands over against reason, whether above reason or contrary to reason or however you wish to put it. Rather, reasoning itself rests upon the presupposition of faith and collapses as arbitrary without it.
Exactly. Yeah, this is another point that we have to make in the face of, you know, the natural theology, so-called apologetic, which gives the impression that there is, you know, this sort of two-tiered system of you have autonomous reasoning, and then that kind of lays the groundwork for the superstructure of faith on top of that, right? And there's a little bit of overlap in like the Thomistic system between natural reason and supernatural revelation, but they're kind of independent realms that that man's epistemology has to begin with this autonomous reasoning. And John Paul II is very clear about that in Fides et Ratio, so there's no dispute about that in the Roman Catholic system. You put this in your excellent paper that we have in the Discord, by the way. If anybody's interested in reading Father Deacon's paper, it's in the Discord. Mm-hmm. So again, it's great that you cited all that, but this is another good point too, that people mistake. There's faith is fideism. Right? It's a leap of faith. Like, you don't really have reasons for it. It's just you believe these wacky, crazy things out of like an emotional, just sort of like jump, burning in the bosom, right? I'm just going to believe it because it's crazy to believe it.
Now, to make this point, I
by the way, Jay, they're saying
Go ahead.
Your volume is too low. Is it possible to turn that up?
Yeah.
Your volume's lower than mine.
Okay, yeah, just a second.
I don't know how to fix that from my end.
Yeah, I got it. Is that better? That should be sufficiently up.
Let me hear.
To what committed Christians have reasoned or said, which you might feel is too easy and partisan on my behalf, but rather to have us consider what our hostile opponents have pointed out about a central problem in philosophy. We'll look at an issue treated by David Hume, the 18th century Scottish skeptic and also by Bertrand Russell, 20th century English philosopher. Both of these men wrote in strong opposition to religious faith and especially to Christianity. The problem we're going to look at for a few moments here is the problem of induction. Among the expectations with which we encounter experience and encounter the world is the expectation that uniformity can be found between the diverse events, things, or experiences in the world. This expectation may in some cases be quite explicit and self-conscious, but it need not be. For instance, when we learn to drive a car or to speak a foreign language, we usually pay close attention to what is the regular function of certain parts of the car or of the grammatical rules and ordinary word usages of the language. But we eventually come to do these things more automatically or more habitually, and we no longer consciously think about the expected uniformity in our use of cars or our use of language. Our learning and reasoning tacitly assumes that the universe is such that uniformities are expected and exhibited in similar things, even though they are separated by time and space. That the way things happen can be viewed as instances of general laws. And what has occurred in the past is a reliable guide for predicting and thus adjusting to the future. Now, this can be described in an elaborate and abstract way, but not many of you are philosophy majors and would want me to do that. The fact is, each of us is very familiar with what I'm talking about from personal experience. We're all quite acquainted with the process of moving from particular facts in our experience to general truths which are exhibited by those particular experiences. For instance, children don't merely conclude from their pain that a particular case of flame is burning them. They usually project that fire in general, or if you will, all fire, any fire, will burn as well. From observed regularities or associations, we infer universal regularity, even in the unobserved cases or yet future cases. In popular parlance, we say we assume the uniformity of nature. The method of generalizing from observed cases to all cases of the same kind is called induction. The basic guiding principle here is that future cases will be like past cases, that similar things will behave similarly. So, for instance, if certain conditions and events bring about a certain effect today, the same factors will cause a similar effect later. I'll give you a down-to-earth example. Why do we expect toothpaste to spurt from the tube when we squeeze it? You might call this the toothpaste proof of God's existence, okay? We support that expectation in terms of two things. One, our past experience with toothpaste tubes, and two, the belief that nature is uniform, that the future is like the past. Without that second belief, we would not be able to learn from experience. We would not be able to use language. We would not be able to rely on memory or advanced science.
Just a brief interjection here that this point that Bahnsen is making is kind of just a basic principle in philosophy that you've heard me bring up in multiple debates. I think I brought it up with the Matt Dillahunty debate, and I brought it up maybe with Stefan, which is just the idea that the principle of induction or the regularity of nature undergirds science. And so the opponent that Dr. Bahnsen is going to be, the worldview that Tabash has is going to be a scientific type of worldview. And so that's why Bahnsen is kind of undercutting the scientism by going for one of the things that scientism can never explain or give an account for, which is induction and the regularity of nature. And that itself is absolutely necessary for the scientific process itself. By the way, can you comment for a second? I think I fixed your audio on my end if there was a problem on the levels.
Yeah, do our levels sound equal?
It should be equal now. I tried to move all the...
Have we reached equity?
Equilibrium, man. Anyway, it'll take a minute for the chat to catch up, but let me know if Father Deacon's audio sounds equal.
All of which involve observing similarities.
Did you have a comment? No? Okay.
And projecting them into the future. Moreover, our belief about uniformity, or the inductive principle, is a very firmly entrenched belief. When scientists found that there were deviations in the expected orbit of Uranus, they did not draw the conclusion, okay, nature is not uniform after all. That just impelled them to start looking for another factor as yet unknown that was influencing the orbit of Uranus. They did not give up the inductive principle, but they rather hypothesized the body, which, by the way, we now know to be the planet Neptune. And so from toothpaste to the planets, we believe and reason in terms of the inductive principle. Now, David Hume's question was this, and I quote, "What is the nature of that evidence which assures us of any real existence and matter of fact beyond the present testimony of our senses or the records of our memory? By what logical right," he was asking, "do we claim to know that some empirical generalizations are true? What," asked Hume, "are we warranted in asserting on the basis of our experiences?"
Now, this is, again, I just want to highlight how devastating this is to the opposing positions paradigm. Remember, if we're thinking about interacting with somebody like a Richard Dawkins, Neil deGrasse Tyson, the average kind of bro Rogan listener who's a devotee of scientism, they're not going to know the solution to this basic dilemma that David Hume has presented centuries ago as one of the key representatives of their camp, right? David Hume is one of the famous atheists, right? In the Enlightenment, he's the great skeptic. And being consistent with his skepticism, he noted that there's no empirical basis for the principle of induction, for the regularity of nature. And by extension, therefore, there's no empirical basis for causation or teleology. Did you have a point?
That's it. That's a great, exactly. I'm glad that we love using David Hume.
Yeah, and so therefore, every time the atheist attempts to argue, he'll be utilizing principles that are unjustified on his worldview to even argue at all, you see.
And he said, to be very strict in his empiricism, only that in the past, or in the cases so far observed, such and such has been the case. But Hume said, we have no basis for projecting that into the future. And I quote him again. He says, if you insist that the inference is made by a chain of reasoning, I desire you to produce that reasoning. Now, of course, many people make the mistake of responding to Hume saying, hey, listen, we all assume the future will be like the past. Hume said that he understood that. There's no question that in practice we act that way. But as he said, and I quote him again, I want to learn the foundation of this inference.
Yeah.
And then there are people who say, well, we know it's very probable, even though it may not be certain. But that misses Hume's point as well. Hume knew very well that we don't have certainty about all matters of science. His point is that we have no logical right to affirm on the basis of our past experience that even probability is true of the natural order. And so that the principle of induction is left without a foundation. Bertrand Russell, the 20th century philosopher, said that we cannot justify our belief in induction on the basis of the past success we've had in believing that the inductive principle is true, because that too assumes that what happened in the past is going to be like the future.
And by the way, when you bring this up, these are the typical responses that you get from the atheism, scientism crowd, right? Well, it's always worked in the past. Well, the question is, how do we know and how do we justify the claim that it will work in the future? Because it always worked in the past. Yeah, that's not a sufficient response. That's begging the question.
Let me quote Russell here. The inductive principle is equally incapable of being proved by an appeal to experience. Experience might conceivably confirm the inductive principle as regards the cases that have been already examined, but as regards unexamined cases, it is the inductive principle alone that can justify any inference from what has been examined to what has not been examined. All arguments which on the basis of experience argue as to the future or the unexperienced parts of the past or present assume the inductive principle. Hence, we can never use experience to prove the inductive principle without begging the question. So now, do we have reason for believing the inductive principle? We need to set the Christian worldview, the theistic worldview, side by side with the atheist worldview and ask which one comports with the inductive principle and thus provides the preconditions for science, language, learning, and any intelligible human experience. And I would say it's certainly not atheism. Atheism's view of reality and historical eventuation cannot provide a cogent reason for what all of our reasoning takes for granted. It is debunked by its philosophical arbitrariness at just this point, as even men like Hume and Bertrand Russell realized. Accordingly, it is most reasonable to believe in God and entirely unreasonable not to believe in God, for God's existence is the precondition of all reasoning whatsoever.
So there you go. That is a transcendental argument Bahnsen has presented utilizing the principle of induction, right, which is one of the basic philosophical points that is a precondition for the possibility of knowledge, right? So it's a pretty simple presentation here, right? I mean, Bahnsen is not getting too abstract, too out there. Just a brief review, and I ran out of space, so I had to put number 5 in the middle. But basically, Bahnsen's presentation was just this. We're all doing worldview apologetics. All of our perception of the world is theory-laden, and so it's going to be ultimately not a battle of facts with the atheist, quote unquote, right? Because there are no brute facts. It's going to be a question of competing paradigms by which we interpret the facts, because all facts are theory-laden. Next, he moved to the rebutting of evidentialism, right? Because this is the case. It's not going to be because theory-laden, the theory-ladenness of nature and reality is the case. It's not going to be solved by competing degrees or amounts of evidence. If I can just pile up 70,000 pieces of evidence, the atheist will convert to Christianity. No. Number 3, truth is, I can't even read my note. Truth is the issue here, right? The truth or falsity of atheism and theism is the issue, and not the psychological motivations for beliefs, not the persuasions, right? Or the again, psychological motivations that we have to believe X, Y, or Z. That's really irrelevant to the truth or falsity of the topics at hand, because people could be persuaded to believe false things. People can also genuinely believe things that are the case when they're not, or are not the case when they are. Right? I could choose to believe that I don't have cancer when in fact the doctor has decided and determined that I do. Right? So psychological motivations don't have anything to do with the truth or falsity of what's under discussion. And number 4, fideism is not the same thing as faith. Right? Fideism is not what we're doing here, saying just take a leap. There's no basis because the truths of reason are at war or contrary to the truths of faith. In fact, we're making a much stronger argument that the ability to reason at all, at least in the empirical inductive sense, requires that nature operate in a regular way, which cannot be proven through empirical investigation. And so therefore it relies on some form of faith, right, to justify itself. That faith for us ultimately is the Christian paradigm. The world is operating in a normative, regular fashion because of divine providence and because God created it. That actually makes perfect sense why there would be a world with regularity. But as David Hume said on the atheist paradigm, I should wake up tomorrow and I have no reason to believe that the floor won't suddenly turn into quicksand. Father Deacon, any comments on Bahnsen's opening statement there?
So we'll notice that when I present a presuppositional transcendental argument too, that there's usually three things that I say at least are required, but one of them, Bahnsen points out here, that it must give an account for the appearances.
Right.
As you had said, that like we have, so not only just a justification for our use of knowledge, but all the things that we want to actually believe in, as you had said, the uniformity of nature, the inductive method, all these different things. So it's nice that he picked up on and pointed that out. Of which, and notice he's already began to set it up in the dichotomy. It's either this or it's that, and it can't be atheism, right? In the kind of disjunctive syllogism. Yeah,
exactly. And another point I'd like to make too is a lot of times people ask questions about, well, what are the things that I'm appealing to in this argument? And so you could list all kinds of things that could be used, right? In other words, you don't have to make the argument using induction. I mean, you can, but I think Bahnsen is using induction for the tactical advantage over a guy from the world of scientism who absolutely requires induction and probably doesn't realize it, right? Because he doesn't know, right, the philosophical principles at work here. Because as that guy I retweeted today on Twitter said, there's no such thing as philosophy of science. So countless people get PhDs in this, right? We'll have Dr. Sean on in the next couple of days. He's got a PhD, but it doesn't exist. So Dr. Sean might like to know that apparently the atheist guy in Europe does not believe that what he has a PhD in even exists. Exactly. Doesn't even exist. So do we have to use induction? No, right? I mean, you've heard me make this argument from kind of anything. You could make a transcendental argument using universals. You could use numbers. You could use ethics or value judgments. You could use the principle of induction, as Bahnsen is doing here. You could use the issue of identity over time. You could use the principle of telos. You could use causation, causality. You could use the question of meaning, right? So all of those, or truth, right? Propositional truth, truth value, truth over time, truth values over eternality of truth. All of these types of things could be used to counter an opponent in a transcendental form or way. It doesn't really matter what you start with. You could start with a pencil. It doesn't matter. You ready for Tabash?
Exactly.
Now, it's been a few years.
By the way, I've met Tabash.
Say what?
I met Tabash.
Really?
I've actually met Eddie Tabash. Wow. Yeah, I saw him debate. In fact, the person that got me into apologetics back in like 1995. And then I eventually started learning transcendental arguments through various groups. A couple of years ago, he had a debate with Eddie Tabash.
Oh, wow.
Maybe 3 years ago.
Okay.
That I went to.
Cool.
And Eddie Tabash is a lawyer.
Right. Now,
so this is why he's going to lose the debate.
Right. Now, lawyers don't usually fare too well in the realm of metaphysics and epistemology. They might be good at rhetoric and kind of finding some traps here and there, but when it comes to metaphysics and epistemology, they're typically severely deficient. So it's been a few.
They might be good at getting you off of a murder rap, but
well, it's been a few years since I heard this debate, but my memory is that Tabash relies on a lot of emotional appeals, but we'll see what he does.
Thank you, Dr. Bahnsen. Mr. Tabash, would you please now give us your 15-minute opening statement?
There is a reason why those of us who do not believe in the Christian concept of God have decided not to adopt that belief, and that is a lack of evidence that pertains to our experience of the physical world in which we live. And I must say that the Christian concept of God itself is highly offensive to a rational conceptualization of a just, omnipotent being. Because what kind of God is it that would tell me that my sincere disbelief in that theology will result in eternal punishment?
Here we go, right away, by the way. He has ignored everything. I mean, granted, this is opening statements, but completely ignored everything Bahnsen presented. Is reframing the debate in an evidentialist framework that there's no evidence for this, or severely lacking evidence that doesn't match our experience. And fallacy, red flag, number one, emotional appeal. Right.
Yes.
What kind of a cosmic egomaniac is this to cast people like me in a lake of fire and take flaming vengeance on me, as is said in the New
Here we
Testament,
go, emotional appeal. You're
and
right.
to do all the things to me that will happen throughout the New Testament, damnation and everything for those who believe not the gospel of Jesus Christ. Where is the evidence to our sensory perception, even to our
There we go.
concept
Stop it,
of
Jay.
the
So it's
order
he
of...
ignores Bahnsen's opening line, doesn't he? About and immediately goes to this base kind of evidentialism.
Yeah, he wants to.
And second of all,
go ahead.
He said what we had pointed out, that emotions have nothing to do with the truth. So what is Tabash's argument right here? I don't like first of all, it's a straw man, the position that he's making. So we could call him out for that.
Right.
And say, well, that's not actually the Christian position.
Yeah, exactly.
But second of all, if it was, I don't like it, so it's not true. That's what his argument was. And I'd call him on that. Let me just
Bahnsen had said that
what you're saying is, I don't like it, so it's not true.
Yeah, and Bahnsen had even said the psychological motivations for belief or unbelief are kind of irrelevant.
Yes.
To the truth or falsity of the issue.
Of the universe to the order of the physical environment in which we live, where is the evidence that that whole cosmos is structured by a being that has so sinister a purpose for us, so sinister a purpose as to consign us to eternal damnation because we cannot bring ourselves to believe in that which is invisible? I submit that such a...
Now we got to stop here because this is a conflating of many different topics. Now, first of all, Bahnsen's argument is a demonstration and proof of something invisible, right? Remember in the Bahnsen-Stein debate, there was a similar sort of sleight of hand that Gordon Stein said that there's not evidence of anything immaterial and invariant that out there at all. And Bahnsen says, basically, do you believe in logic? Yes. And he says, well, logic is right, invariant, immaterial. And then Stein just kind of stumbles over his words for a few seconds because he's tripped up. So likewise here, right. You've got Tabash appealing to the fact that there's no evidence of things immaterial and invariant. Well, how about the principle of induction that he just spent 10 minutes giving an exposition of? The principle of induction is immaterial. It's invariant. It's not found in any sense data or a single instance of sense perception. It is a category that's you could say a category that's a precondition for the possibility of knowledge of the external physical world, but it's not identical to the physical world in any shape or form. So right away, just bypassing the very argument, and that's because I don't think Tabash understands the argument, obviously.
And by the way, I've noticed this, and you've noticed this too, as far as there is no evidence. And watch me ad hoc define what evidence is going to count as. So there's no evidence of immaterial things, and the only thing I accept as evidence is empirically verified.
Yeah, I will accept any physical.
I
will accept any physical evidence of immaterial things that you can give. That's basically the atheist approach. Literally, right?
Yeah. So you should repeat that back. So let me just get this straight. That's your argument. Let's just get this down on the record.
You ready?
Yep.
Such a being is not a god, but a devil. and I submit that such a being is non-existent.
By the way, he has a presupposed ethic that God is mean and unfair. We need to know some ethical bases, and in the atheist paradigm, on what basis you're making these ethical judgments about the deity, right? Because if this is the case, you've got to have a way to justify the basis for the value judgments that you're making.
Yeah, exactly.
So God is mean, God is unfair. Well, in an atheist worldview, on what basis do you make these judgments?
And if such a being were existent, then this is not a God but a cosmic trickster who is playing a colossal scheme of hide and seek because we can't see this being. If this being truly exists, let it not speak to me from the antiquity of ancient books and tell me that I have to believe in it, even though I have no direct evidence, because of the hearsay of people who lived 2,000 and 3,000 years.
Well, if we did want to get into evidentialism and powerful evidences, there are the dozens and dozens and dozens of messianic prophecies that Jesus actually appeals to in the parable of the guy who goes to Abraham's bosom. And if you remember in that story, the guy says, right, when he dies and he's not in a good situation, and he says, Lord, let me go back and warn my brothers, because if somebody rises from the dead, then they'll believe and they won't come to this horrible place. And Jesus says, even if one rises from the dead, they won't believe because they had Moses and the prophets. Now, if they won't believe Moses and the prophets, aka the predictions of Moses and the prophets about the Messiah, they're not going to believe just because somebody, quote, rises from the dead or claims to rise from the dead or even rises from the dead. They will reinterpret the rising from the dead to fit their narrative, their paradigm, right? So in other words, Jesus makes the very point Bahnsen's making. Yea, even though one rise from the dead, they will not believe.
Years ago, why not appear to all of us directly? In fact, God, you who, if you're listening and you're really there, show yourself right now. Come out of hiding, manifest on the stage, do a colossal miracle, levitate this building, do something to show me more than the words of ancient.
Go ahead.
So, by the way, your argument the other night that was saying, if science is real, then you need to, quantum has to come together in such a way to make a portal back into time where then I can kill my grandfather. And if that doesn't happen, science isn't real.
Oh, that's funny. I never thought about that. Right?
I forget exactly what your example. But the other thing too is that notice
make a wormhole portal black hole right here on stage. And if you do, I will believe in science. And if you don't, I don't believe in science. Right.
That's right. And so also, by the way, remember that's the exact same temptation that Satan tempts Christ with. If you're God, then throw yourself down. But what the very nature of God is, he never does anything that's unnecessary, and only demons ask for things. Do this, turn this into a...
Well, it's what the Pharisees
turn
did
this
too,
into a
remember?
snake. Do this,
If you are the Messiah, give us a sign, do some miracle to prove it. Even though there's countless examples of it, and even when Jesus does miracles, they still don't believe. That's the point.
Also, we can teach him on... He's using a motive language, which isn't per se like a fallacy. Sometimes it has rhetorical advantage, and you use that in persuasion. But it's good to become aware of it. What are the emotive terms that he's using? And does anything necessarily follow from that?
Yeah.
Now, what I picked up on is he was saying ancient books. This is a great point. Yeah. Anything ancient is obviously false.
Yeah, right.
And it reveals his kind of
great
presupposition of what I call futurism, or the myth of progress.
Oh,
that everybody in the past was dumb and didn't know anything, and of course, we in the future, we know.
So this is a rhetorical device. In other words, the emotive language may not it may not technically be a fallacy, although earlier he did commit a fallacy when he did the emotional appeal. The emotive language that you pointed out, that's great. I didn't even catch that. That's a rhetorical device that doesn't really. Again, rhetoric has a place in debate.
Now, if he frames that into an argument,
right.
If he frames that into an argument, and therefore therefore anything in the past is obviously that's a fallacy. But he is using a rhetorical and trying to get you in the mindset of thinking that, well, yeah, people in the past are dumb.
I gotta listen to dusty old books and superstitious old men.
By the way, yeah, that's right. So why don't we throw out Euclid and geometry?
Right. I'm supposed to listen to dusty old geometry from dusty old books from Euclid and Pythagoras. Yeah, right. That's a good point.
Women weren't even permitted to draft and participate in the Bible.
Oh, here we go. Women weren't allowed to draft and participate in the Bible, as if that somehow has something to do with the truth or falsity of the Bible. So what, right? So what's that? That's a virtue signal appeal, right?
Yeah, he's gonna get half the feminists on his side just for that one.
Yeah, I mean, these appeals have nothing to do with the truth or falsity of the religion of the Bible, of God's existence. They're just rhetorical devices, and this is something we've noticed and seen again with a lot of these atheists, right? Especially with Sam Harris. Remember when we did the Sam Harris debate, guys, how the whole thing was emotional appeals. The whole thing was rhetoric. The whole thing was a child right now screams out in agony in Africa. How, therefore, could God be, right?
Bible. Show me something more than ancient hearsay from the dust of antiquity to prove your existence. And if you do not meet my challenge, I say to you, if you're awake and listening, that you are violating your moral duty to manifest yourself, considering that you yourself have erected such harsh penalties to befall all those of us who will not believe in you.
Well, the harsh penalties are what we incur upon ourselves, right? So it's not like God is forcing us into hating him, forcing us into hell, kicking and screaming because we actually loved God, but we just didn't have enough evidence, or we didn't have enough facts presented. It's the other way around. There's nothing but evidence for God, but the twisted mind of the fallen man and the unbeliever suppresses that truth in unrighteousness, right? This is what Paul says in Romans 1, right, is that proper interpretation of the external world and of nature requires repentance, right? St. Justin Popovich has a whole essay on the theory of knowledge of St. Isaac the Syrian, that we can't even interpret the natural world correctly without repentance. And so, again, Tabash has it backwards, right? That the natural man cannot perceive the things of the Spirit because he is in rebellion.
Oh, and by the way, he's just going to throw in there for good measure, moral duty, just self-evident, universally across the board, that needs no justification whatsoever from my position.
Yeah, right. What is that? Moral duty? Yeah, right.
If there is such a penalty to be paid.
By the way, we could take that phrase moral duty and subject that to his critique of evidentialist framing. What is the evidential argument for moral duty in an empiricist atheist worldview?
Great. And you know why? Because you already get this in Hume that you can't derive the ought
from an is.
Yeah. And that later develops into from the kind of radical empiricists and naturalists, they take that a step. Now, they take it a step further than Hume, because Hume still thought that there was a moral realm. But people took that a step further and were more consistent in the kind of atheistic materialism and said the only things that exist are just facts, and facts are empirical. Therefore, there is no more realm of oughts. And so now morality, well, what do we mean when we say that torture is immoral? There's no fact. It might look grammatically like that, but we just retranslate it to simply be preference.
Yeah, this comes up.
This is what's called the emotive theory of ethics.
Yeah, this comes up.
In other words, when you say grammatically, what's the meaning of torture is wrong? Torture of the innocent is wrong. I don't like it when people are tortured. Would you not please torture? Torture. You know, it's emotive expressions. There is no factual content to it whatsoever.
Yeah, this
expressing some type of emotional reaction.
Yeah,
so you could pull that on Tabash.
Well, we saw this in the Trent Horn Cosmic Skeptic debate, where Trent Horn cornered Cosmic Skeptic and demolished him precisely on that point. And they brought up the case of cannibalism, and Cosmic Skeptic was basically forced to admit that he couldn't say that it was actually wrong. So, yeah, exactly.
For disbelief, then you must, to be fair, give us greater evidence to induce that belief, rather than to expect us to take questionable testimony from primitive times as a basis for making.
That's that assumption of progress that you were talking about. Primitive times and questionable testimony. Is this guy aware of how often scientific revolutions occur and how shifting sands the scientific world is in terms of their theories and their claims? But somehow we're supposed to think that because it was where's the cutoff, by the way, in these delineations of the ages, right? The Dark Ages is this superstitious period, which was an invented idea by Voltaire, right? Where is the exact scientific delineation of the superstitious period? This is all bullshit.
For making a judgment about the nature of eternity. And so I would say that not only is there no evidence, but that the Christian concept of God is a immoral monster for positing such eternal punishment for understandable lack of belief.
Now, basically, Tabash is expressing that he doesn't like it. This is not really an argument. I mean, he's trying to say that it's just not fair. But what is your presupposition of fairness, right? On what grounds are you going to decide what is and isn't fair? It seems to me that that's going to be determined by your paradigm, the worldview that you come from. Now, if atheism is true, there's not a basis to say that anything is unfair. Things just are, right? There's nothing that's fair or unfair. They just are.
I am sincerely wrong. After I die, God should say, well, Eddie, you blew it, but it's understandable. I didn't give you much to go on. So you still get to avoid the barbecue pit.
Well, that's what, again, the atheists misunderstand, is that they think that there is a neutral, brute factual world out there, and we just don't know where it comes from or what it means. And so, therefore, there's not really any significant evidence of God, because all the evidence ever has been is Aquinas' 5 proofs. And since those are not very good arguments, there's just not really evidence for God or first cause of the universe. But if we look at Romans 1, the Pauline psychology of the unbeliever, it's amazing that I'm not saying this makes the Bible true, but it's interesting that Paul's psychological analysis of the unbeliever is the perfect description of Tabash, right? Because how does Paul characterize unbelief in Romans 1? Is it a lack of facts and evidence? No, it's an anger that's deep-seated in the heart of hearts to suppress the truth and reject the true God that every man knows in his heart of hearts exists because he's fallen. So isn't it interesting that?
And you know what was interesting? Yep. If you remember my discussion with Dr. Josh Rasmussen, and he was kind of going and giving, you know, a really moving kind of testimonial of like when he was kind of an atheist, but he couched it in terms of kind of this evidence. And he is kind of an evidentialist.
Oh, I remember that, yeah.
That, well, you know, it really wasn't, you know, it was more kind of intellectual. I really don't think I was in rebellion or.
Oh, yeah, I forgot that part, yeah. I wasn't suppressing the truth. That wasn't me, yeah.
The thing is, you know, when you read St. Isaac the Syrian on Knowledge from Justin Popovich, and it talks about that us being away from God, we do suppress. We don't see things correctly. So right. It's not like, you know, you being away from God have insight and introspection and whether you're even suppressing or not.
Right.
So, you know, an eyewitness first-person report, I wasn't suppressing, doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah, we have to reorient,
like,
right? The whole paradigm gets
question. Yeah,
our whole paradigm and how we interpret even our own psychology gets reoriented by revelation. Paul says, "For I am not ashamed
of the spiritual virtues." Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. It is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For by it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith. For as it is written, the just shall live by faith. God's wrath is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because what may be known of God is evident in them. God has shown it to them. He's talking about the entire pagan world universally. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead. And thus there is no one without excuse, right? Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were they thankful, but they became futile in their hearts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools. Pagan wisdom is foolishness. It's not wisdom. They exchanged the glory of the uncorruptible God into the image of forfeited corruptible man, beasts, birds, right? Idolatry, creeping things. Therefore, God gave them over to the lust of their hearts, etc. So the point Paul's making is just that the Romans 1 is not a treatise on natural theology and how to do Aristotelian syllogisms. It's a treatise on the fact that there is a direct intuitive revelation of God to every human being in their heart of hearts, aka their nous. And because of the fall, it's suppressed, it's forgotten, and it's rebelled against. And that's why it takes grace to be saved.
Well, hold on, Jay. You're telling me that Paul wasn't saying that by all men, toddlers do the cosmological column argument.
Right. Yeah, you're right. Exactly. Paul's saying that if a toddler, or if a 5-year-old would just reason properly and think clearly, he would work his way through a S4 modal syllogism to come to the existence of some supreme force or essence.
But the fact that Christian theology says that if we do not accept Jesus, it's the grill room, that is something which is offensive to the nature of not only normal human evidence, but it's offensive to our nature of right and wrong. And where is the proof other than a dusty old book written thousands of years ago of questionable authorship? Now, the argument is that...
By the way, this is an important point that I think Bahnsen will bring this up, if not here, maybe in another talk. But later on in this, he points out that atheists love to kind of throw out those passing things of like the Bible of questionable authorship, but they won't ever cite a source, right? They'll just say, well, scholars know that the Bible has errors. We know nowadays we know the Bible has errors. Bart Ehrman has shown that the Bible has, right?
Yeah,
they'll just throw this stuff out.
Nowadays we know argument.
Yeah, we now know argument. Exactly. They just throw it out, and most of the time it just goes unchecked. So watch for that.
That there is design in the universe. But if there is such design, then the theists can't have it both ways.
Did Bahnsen present a teleological argument? No, he did not. And I think, if I remember, Bahnsen calls him out on this. I think at one point, and maybe I hope there's a cross-examination, because I can already tell you how the Bahnsen mind works. Dr. Tabash, did you hear me make a teleological argument? No, I did not. Right. So again, no teleological argument on the part of Bahnsen, and yet responding to an argument that Bahnsen didn't make.
Because intelligent planning in the universe means that there are physical laws that we can apprehend that have uniformity of application. And if those physical laws have uniformity of application and the design is such that it possesses pattern, precision, and regularity, so that we may know that that design is reliable, then those very laws cannot be violated by the introduction of unprovable miracles. And so the claim for miracles is itself a violation of the very claim of design, and the theists cannot have it both ways. Because if the universe is so well ordered, like a perfectly running mechanism, then it means that that design reveals to us that we can apprehend the uniformity of the rules, which are inviolable and which are invariable. And
this is also a non sequitur. Just setting aside the point that Bahnsen didn't make a teleological argument, setting that aside, the fact that the universe shows order and design on the Christian paradigm does not mean that we would collapse the laws of the universe into something invariant and inviolable and something that couldn't be altered, right? I mean, we believe in miracles, right? So this is a non sequitur on the part of what Tabash is saying, because if the Christian paradigm is correct, then God is the source of the natural laws. And so they obey his bidding.
Yes.
And so, of course, God can, I mean, a natural law is just God doing something in one way as opposed to a different way when he does a miracle. So this is a,
well, do you know what's kind of interesting when you just said that? And I really like the way that you put that. But you could even argue that, again, this originates in a kind of a Western problem. Because remember when we actually talk about, and there is in all varieties of evidentialism, whether you're an atheist or a theist, this kind of natural theology, the same assumption that natural theology has, that the natural world is separated from the supernatural.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That man in his, by the natural light of reason alone, apart from revelation, can know things. And that's in stark contrast with the Orthodox view that, yes, God's both transcendent and immanent through his divine energies, right. And we don't have the sharp distinction. We have natural revelation, and natural revelation is what it is in light of supernatural revelation. And so you don't have this kind of antithesis and kind of dialectical problem. And so when you just said that, I noticed they've already kind of inherited, even though they're rejecting Christianity, they're still inherited the kind of West problem of this dialectics of opposition between God, the supernatural, and nature.
Yeah, on page 149, St. Justin Popovich says, question, and he's affirming the theory of knowledge of Isaac the Syrian. What is knowledge? Answer, the perception of eternal life. What is eternal life? The perception of all things in God. So that's why I keep saying and stressing that the logi is the meaning of the natural order. This is directly from both St. Isaac and St. Maximus. So what we're perceiving in the natural world ultimately has its meaning in the Logos, who is the medium of the natural world. The natural world came into being through the Logos, from the Father, through the Son, in the Spirit. And so therefore it's going to bear the stamp of the triune God who created it. Thus, we can't accept the Thomistic doctrine of natural theology. It's just that simple. If you believe in the Trinity and that creation happened through the Trinity, doesn't Paul say that the whole created order exists from the Son, through the Son, and for the Son? Yes. In fact, Paul even says that the Logos keeps everything in being. I mean, being itself subsists because the Logos keeps it in being, according to St. Paul.
And thus the very claim of miracle violates that principle of design and uniformity. And that would tend to show that if a God exists, it is not the God of Christian.
The uniformity of nature, again, is going to be interpreted in the Christian paradigm as the uniformity of nature according to God's design and order. So that doesn't mean that God can't step into time and space, that God can't incarnate, that God can't do a miracle, because he seems to think that the uniformity of nature is an ironclad law that would bind God. It's very bizarre. But he's got it backwards. The uniformity of nature is because God created the world to have those properties and principles and regularities.
Christianity or Orthodox Judaism or Islam. It is not the invisible male deity in the sky that gets a temper tantrum every time you don't worship him in the right modality. It would show that that deity is more or less the pantheistic concept as articulated by Spinoza, which is a being that is a prisoner of and subject to its own laws. It means that the God force is as much a subject of its laws as we are, because the uniformity and design of the universe reveals laws that are predictable and immutable and that do not get altered. Also, when I was 5 years old and the rabbis were teaching me about God's parting the Red Sea, my first impulse was to become quite jealous. I was jealous because it meant that my ancient forebears got a chance to see direct proof of something which I was being denied. They had the opportunity to witness a miraculous event directly, and I was being denied that opportunity because miracles no longer happened. And I told the rabbis that if we could go to the Santa Monica beach and see God part the Pacific Ocean in a miraculous fashion, that would induce belief. And why is it that we must rely on a book written, I guess, altogether somewhere between 1350 BC and maybe when everybody got it together about 250 AD, which wasn't even in its initial codified form until 325 in the Council of Nicaea, where even the book of Luke, as I understand it, only made it into the Gospels by one vote, and other books were discarded. So if we have a book that took about 1,400 years to put together of dubious authorship at a time without word processors, without reliable testimony.
By the way, just throwing these claims out, what is the actual proof or evidence, Mr. Evidentialist, of dubious authorship? I mean, he doesn't even cite a second, or he just throws this stuff out like machine gun.
Without floppy disks and mag cards to show fidelity to the original texts, without even good Xerox machines, how in the world are we to be expecting that not one word in that book is in error?
By the way, that's a straw man, of course. When the atheists do their textual criticism type arguments, most of the time they refer to copyist errors, which nobody denies that there are copyist errors, but 99% of those are errors that relate to later manuscripts being copied in different codices. So this isn't even an objection to the autographa, which is what we would typically say is free from error or is inerrant. And I think Bahnsen actually will cover that. But I'd like to hear who Tabash thinks is the person to prove this. And by the way, there's plenty of scholarship to actually vindicate and point out the veracity of the New Testament text. I did a whole stream on this a couple of years ago, just pointing out the scholarship that notes the amazing amount of attestation to the New Testament in the first several centuries. There's literally no other ancient historical text with the voluminous amounts of attestation from primary and secondary sources that, like the Bible. It's pretty amazing, actually. But they don't ever talk about that. They ignore it.
Nope.
How can we expect not one word in that book is in error? And in the Gospels, we see...
By the way, well, if the Christian paradigm is true, then if God can create the world, He can preserve His text from error. I mean, this is an obvious one, right? And I think Bahnsen will call this out. Actually, he will make that point, I think.
A few errors and or contradictions. The resurrection. One book says that 2 women went.
Oh, by the way, everybody in the chat, if you would, feel free to support us. I'll be splitting these super chats, of course, with Father Deacon tonight for joining me on this review and analysis reaction to the Bahnsen Tabash debate.
To the tomb. Others said 3 women. One book says that the stone was already pulled aside when they got there. The other book says, no, it wasn't. It was pulled aside when they got there. One book says there was an angel outside saying he is risen. The other said there was one man in a white garment inside. The other says, no, there were 2 guys inside. And so if the Bible is absolutely inerrant, there could not be this contradiction. There couldn't be this...
By the way, those were some of the weakest examples of so-called textual discrepancies. There's like way better examples of textual discrepancies than those. Those were terrible. Sounds like he... I mean, they didn't
and you expect that in eyewitness testimony.
Well, I mean, yeah.
Right?
And by the way, that's,
like you didn't...
Like 1 and 2 is not even out of accord because saying that I saw one doesn't exclude the possibility of there also being another angel inside.
Exactly.
There's all
they
kinds
never
of
think
different,
about that.
like, possibilities there.
God of the Old Testament that says, yes, you Jews, you're my people. You are my sons and daughters. You are my chosen people. And then in the book of Thessalonians talking about how the Jews are accursed because of their denial of Jesus and that they are contrary to men.
Well, that's because Hosea himself in the Old Testament says that. So apparently Tabash is even ignorant of his own text. If he had read Hosea, he would know that even in the Old Testament period, God said that when you depart, you're accursed and you are a harlot. So Hosea predicts, in fact, that God will divorce Israel. So how is it possible that God divorces Israel and yet is faithful to all the promises of Israel? Well, that's the whole point of the new covenant. That's how, right?
There also could not be chapter 7, verse 14 in the book of Isaiah, which says that, in fact, a child will be born not to a virgin, but the original Hebrew alma is young woman. If they wanted to use the word virgin, they would have said betullah, not alma in the original Hebrew, and then to say that his son will be Emmanuel. Well, Jesus' name was not Emmanuel. And the whole chapter of Isaiah was talking about a sign to a king 600 years before.
So in regard to the end section of the Gospel of Mark and in regard to John 8, we have a whole interview with a New Testament scholar, Dr. James Snap. I can't remember if he's a doctor or not, but go listen to the interview that I did with James Snap. He's a big defender of the Byzantine text, and he covers the issue at the end of the Gospel of Mark and the adulterous woman.
Before Jesus was to be born, 600 years before Jesus, a king who was being beset by the kingdom of Israel and a kingdom to the east, and this was a poor king of the kingdom of Judea who was besieged. So, hold up the sign. Yeah. Okay. So the whole point is that not only is the Bible not containing evidence in the physical, rational universe to exhibit its authenticity, it doesn't show internal consistency. And even if it did show internal consistency, that does not mean that its claims of supernaturalism are true. Now, it's true that I can't explain every phenomenon in the universe, but I don't have to. If there is lightning, and I don't necessarily know how that came about, that doesn't mean that the superstition
Oops, that was my mistake.
is offering of somebody from a primitive tribe that says that this is the alligator god who gets angry at the trees, that doesn't mean that that's true. So,
by the way, there's the James Snap interview that covers the two textual issues that are usually brought up.
the fact that religion is...
Oh, man. Dang it.
Design reveals to us that we can apprehend the uniformity of the rules are true. Now, it's true that I can't explain every phenomenon in the universe, but I don't have to. If there is lightning, and I don't necessarily know how that came about, that doesn't mean that the superstitious offering of somebody from a primitive tribe that says that this is the alligator god who gets angry at the trees, that doesn't mean that that's true. So the fact that religionists can fabricate myths that explain away as of yet
this is it's like they never want to interact with our position, or they choose the worst possible exponents of Christianity, right, with no philosophical training or no metaphysical understanding. That's who they'll usually finger as their best exponents of Christianity, so they can knock down the straw man or the low-hanging fruit, right? This is the modus operandi of like a Ben Shapiro, right? Ben Shapiro will knock down the low-hanging fruit of every 90 IQ college social justice warrior, and whoa, facts and logic, bro. He's like the most genius guy in the world, because he's only debating the dumbest position, right? Again, this is the fallacy, right? So the fact that something is badly argued does not mean that the position is true or false, right? In other words, if I make a bad argument for 2 + 2, if I say, I know that 2 + 2 is 4 because I had a dream last night and it was revealed to me in my dream that 2 + 2 is 4. Now, that's a bad argument for 2 + 2 equaling 4. But that doesn't mean 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4, you see. That's the fallacy.
All of this can reveal, too, that Tabash actually isn't concerned with the truth, that this is all motive-based.
Yes.
He actually is suppressing the evidence because,
for
example, when I do my philosophical work, I don't actually go for low-hanging fruit. I actually try to find the most difficult objections.
Good point.
That's why, when it came to the transcendental argument, that I said the best out there, the critique of transcendental, just as a general, argument as far as epistemology goes, is what am I blanking on his name? Barry Stroud's article. Because I want to test my arguments and see if they're good, because I want to know what's actually true. Then I find the most difficult, the best objections, and then I'll know it'll work everywhere else. So people who do that, and are people who really want to concern, is it a good argument? And
you're cutting out and roboting.
Sorry.
Are you there? Can we hear you? Can you hear me?
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I'm here.
You're cutting out pretty bad right now. That's a great point about Barry Stroud. I mean, Barry Stroud, by the way, is not critiquing the transcendental argument for God. He's just arguing that the transcendental argument requires other things, which is true, right? So he says that because you require a verification principle, the transcendental argument is not actually proving anything itself. It requires other ancillary arguments, which as a proponent of the transcendental argument for God, right, I would agree, right, because we're arguing for an entire paradigm, and hence why Barry Stroud's critique really only works for transcendental arguments themselves, as if they functioned on their own, right? But there's a difference between the transcendental argument for God and just transcendental arguments. So if Stroud were critiquing Kant, I would agree. That's a great critique of Kant. But we're not Kantians, and we're doing something different. So.
Am I cutting out now? I just actually stopped talking. I don't know if I was, but you said I was roboting too.
You're okay now.
Okay.
Unknown phenomena does.
Go ahead.
I said I feel much better now that I'm no longer a robot too.
Well, you're just kind of in and out of existence. You're kind of like popping in and out of being. So maybe you stepped into that portal to the atheist multiverse, and you're kind of fading in and out of being. I'm a little worried about your ontological status right now, Father Deacon.
It's like Back to the Future.
Yeah, you're like Marty McFly in the picture.
Like
You're like half in being and out of being.
Doesn't mean that their God of the gaps, that their filler is true.
Notice the complete reversal of what Bahnsen is arguing. Bahnsen is arguing the very opposite of the God of the gaps. Right? Bahnsen is not saying that anywhere in the natural world I find something mysterious, I just stick God in there, and therefore God, the God of the gaps, is my argument for Christianity. Bahnsen's doing the opposite. Bahnsen is saying that you can't have cognition, knowledge, experience at all that's meaningful unless the triune God exists. Very opposite of what Tabash is replying to.
I don't have to say that I can prove to you that there are not, in the words of Dr. Leonard Peikoff right now, a convention of gremlins on Venus studying Hegel. I don't have to prove to you.
Isn't Leonard Peikoff the Ayn Rand atheist? The classic Ayn Rand. I think he is. That's the Rand Institute guy.
Because such a thing is so outside the ordinary sensory and scientific and empirical everyday experience of the normal course of these very immutable laws the theists say show design. Because of that, the burden of proof is on them to show that there are a convention of gremlins on Venus studying Hegel and even a little Immanuel Kant, if you want to add spice to it. So,
well, this often comes up in debates, which is kind of annoying because people a lot of times try to play this game of the burden of proof is on you, not me. No, the burden of proof is on you, not me. And they end up debating about who has the burden of proof, which is a silly debate because depending on what's being argued, right, that's going to determine whether you think it's an outlandish claim, right? So the atheists are basically saying the existence of God is crazy. It's outlandish. It's like Bill Cosby living on the moon, right? So, but it's not outlandish if the Christian paradigm is true, and that's what's in discussion, right? So what you consider an outlandish, impossible thing is already determined by your paradigm, right? Would you agree?
Exactly, yeah.
again, where is the proof? If somebody is going to tell me that my eternity depends on the acceptance of supernaturalism, which is unprovable, and show me a book which came from the murky past and is already over 2,000 years old, and to tell me that that book was written by infallible people and that the testimony in there is without mistake, even though nothing was written down contemporaneously during the New Testament, there is nothing in the New Testament, perhaps we'll disagree on this, that was directly witnessed by an author of the New Testament. The Gospels, the Gospel of Mark was written maybe 75 AD.
This is a strange line of argument. I mean,
that's insane.
I'm having to think about this. So nobody who wrote the Gospels actually, well, by the way, we don't know the exact date of when the Gospels were written. So this is a speculative, at best,
that's right,
argument. So not sure. By the way, I'm not sure what that would prove anyway. Right, so what?
Which was about 45 years after Jesus died. The book of Revelations, which supposedly houses the infallible word of Jesus as to the final destiny of the world, wasn't written until about 100 AD, about 7.
No, actually, that's also a debated topic. If John the Baptist is, I mean, if John the Apostle is describing the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, then it was written prior to 70 AD.
Exactly.
Which, if you want to read the Dr. Ken Gentry's thesis, it's called Before Jerusalem Fell. It's a really good book arguing that.
70 years after the death of Jesus.
By the way,
What possible...
with the, what is the name of the group, Jay? The seminar, Jesus seminar people. They'll push for those later dates precisely because of to invalidate.
Yeah, they think it disproves the New Testament, particularly Matthew 24, Luke 21, right? Because they want to remove any of the partial preterist arguments. But in fact, the reality is most of the Eastern Fathers, in fact, were partial preterists, and they will make the argument consistently that Matthew 24 and Luke 21 are predictions of the destruction of the temple. By the way, the fact that it's written down at a later date doesn't disprove that the oral teaching wasn't prior to it, right? So this is a non sequitur, right? Because we don't actually know when the autographa were written down. Nobody knows that. So this is an argument from silence.
Yes. Proof is there.
Go ahead.
I said exactly, yeah.
That each of these books was written without mistake, and that when the various councils throughout the first 16 centuries met to decide which books were to be part of the canon and which were not, that their decisions were infallible. Where is the proof that the cosmic entity guided the selection of every book so that what was deleted and what was accepted was without error? And also...
By the way, this is a common misunderstanding and stupid phrase from atheists and unbelievers that no wonder my input is so low. As usual, by the way, Apple decides to default back to mid-level volume settings. So I'm sorry that my input was low. It was because of the stupid defaults that Apple always defaults to. So I just fixed that, guys. Sorry about that. I don't know where they get this idea that things were deleted from the Bible when the Bible was put together. That would presume that there was a Bible already. There's not a Bible already if they're putting the Bible together, and therefore nothing could be deleted from the Bible. This is so dumb.
So, where is the proof that there is such a curmudgeonly, ill-tempered God as the one in the book of Exodus who ordered Moses to have a guy stoned to death because he did nothing more than pick up sticks on the Sabbath? I don't want to know that kind of God. Also, I have concrete proof that God is already in error. God made a mistake in the Bible and has been proved empirically wrong by history. God said in the 3rd chapter of Genesis that the woman shall be ruled over by her husband. I submit that the past 3 millennia of human history has shown that was a bad idea.
Here we go, another social justice appeal. This is so weak, dude. This is like the ultimate weak sauce that, I mean, you know, it's so obvious these people are just trying to score points with liberalism and liberal mindset, right?
And by the way, that's a category error. What that says in Genesis is not a description, but a prescription.
Could you go into that? Explain that. Hello?
So, I mean, what is that? A subjunctive, right? That it's not saying, it's not describing time. Men just will always, well, I'm just going to describe some facts to you. Like I'm describing, you know, that objects fall to the ground. And Eddie Tabash is like, yesterday an object floated up to the sky or something like that. That's kind of like a descriptive level. When it says man shall rule over the wife, that's a moral category that shall, ought, these sort of things. And shalls and oughts are not ises. They're not descriptions. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So when Eddie Tabash is like, well, what was the snarky remark? I present for your evidence.
Yeah, right.
The last 3
millennia of the suppression of women or whatever.
That women have actually, and that's over, Charles. So that's just proven that men actually do rule over women. It's like, that's not what it said.
Okay.
So I would think as a lawyer, he would know his grammar. I mean, that's just a grammatical
grammar
thing.
error.
You should know better. You just made a grammar and a logical categorical error.
We see then that there is a strong likelihood, and in terms of miracles, we have to accept the most believable, that ancient human beings superimposed on a fabricated being their ancient concepts. Patriarchal societies invented a patriarchal God who was nothing more than an extension of their own primitive psychological yearnings, and there is no concrete scientific or empirical proof to demonstrate that that entity governs the world today and will punish us forever because we do not believe in Jesus. I submit that the Christian God is an unproven myth.
Thank you, Mr. Tabash.
So, just a quick review here. What was the flow of this argument? Frame everything in a basic bitch, brute factual, theory neutral, evidentialist framework. Make emotional appeals. Appeal to a straw man position that Bahnsen didn't argue. Use ideas like order in the universe that have no justification on that paradigm. Appeal to ethics on an atheist paradigm that we don't have any account for. Make more or use emotive language as a rhetorical device. But dusty old books, old men in the ancient superstitious world. Appeal to feminism, social justice appeal, virtue signal. Appeal to, quote, moral duty. We don't know what that is in an atheist paradigm. And make a teleological argument or respond to red herring straw man. Bahnsen didn't make a teleological argument. So he's appealing to or responding to an argument that wasn't made. And then again, another fem appeal. So that was the whole of his
you forgot.
resolution. What?
Let's add one for good measure to make an even number 12. For good measure, add the and we now know fallacy.
Yeah, the we now know. That's the one I'm noticing. I didn't know about. I mean, this is a new fallacy that we have made up here, right? Which has emerged as a result of investigating the many atheist debates, right, that we've done here. Is that this is a common refrain? They love this. We now know.
Before we move into phase 2 of segment 1, earlier I asked that you please abstain from using flash bulbs. I know for a fact that the Truth Seeker organization didn't order this, but the Cal Aggie host has instruction from their own supervision to remove anyone that uses flash bulbs during this debate. So I would just advise you to, if you'd like to stay in the audience, to please abstain. Thank you. We will now move into phase 2 of the question and answer period. The first question will be from Dr. Bahnsen to Mr.
Don, can you just give us the time frames of those questions again?
Past success or to any kind of human experience. Mr. Tabash, on what rational basis do you then, as an atheist, justify belief in the inductive principle?
I justify belief in anything, whether the inductive or the deductive principle, pursuant to what my sensory experience, aided by scientific tools, will demonstrate to me. But I feel no obligation to believe in claims of the supernatural of which there is no evidence, and which violate not only my sense of moral justice, as the exclusive club of Christianity portrays itself to be, but also...
I believe you're ranging way beyond...
But also, no, it's part of it. It's part of the answer. Part of the answer is that it's...
You're looking for the inductive principle.
Okay, the inductive principle is a question of reasoning from one item to another. And in that sense, for purposes of discussion tonight.
By the way, in regard to the question in the chat, worst atheist debater would be Sam Harris. If you listen to the Sam Harris debate, there was literally no argument made. It was all, I don't know. Dawkins is pretty bad. I would say Dawkins, Harris, equal level worst atheist. And then
dear Dawkins, Windsor.
I will be underneath the Windsor Castle. I like to suck the blood of babies before any debate, you see.
Anyway, if you listen to the Harris-Craig debate, I don't even think Sam Harris made a single argument. I think the entire thing was emotional appeals and fallacies. So I think he and Dawkins are the worst at debate.
Tonight, it's no different from the deductive principle. There's absolutely no difference between the two, and what.
This is a bizarre line of argumentation that could only come from a person with no philosophical knowledge that induction is identical to deduction. Really? That's laughable.
Yeah.
I mean, Father Deacon, as a philosophy professor, what would you say to someone who said, there is no difference between deduction and induction? They are exactly the same.
I'd say that you failed my class.
You fail?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the wrong end.
That's like saying there's no difference between metaphysics and epistemology. There is no difference between the two. I mean, it's just silly. It's absurd. Of course they're different.
What you do is induction or deduction builds upon or strips away excess dross based on the physical evidence that you have to work with.
Okay, this is just a painful ignorance of these principles in epistemology, that all you're doing in induction and deduction is scraping off the dross that you don't have evidence for. What? I mean, that has nothing to do with what inductive and deductive reasoning is.
That is how you develop your tools for...
Go ahead.
He doesn't know what he's talking
No,
about.
he has no clue what he's talking about.
It's an embarrassment.
It's embarrassing.
Induction
Now, what's
or deduction.
unfortunate is the audience probably doesn't know either. And I'm noticing this more and more in debates, is that the audience are 10 times dumber than the person up there talking. So it's like, why are, like, is anybody even, why is there even an audience? Like, first of all, because they're not capable of understanding it. And all of this misses Bahnsen's point about Hume, which he probably knows nothing about. So there you go. All right, go ahead.
And they are a sensory, empirical manifestation, and therefore they do not require recourse to stepping outside the perceptible universe to a postulated supreme being.
Mr. Tabash, you may ask Dr. Bahnsen a question.
Well, Dr. Bahnsen, since you said that it is your purpose to defend Christian theism, I wanted to ask you about the fundamental fairness of a God that would, and it says in the New Testament many places, talk about damnation, hellfire, lake of fire, in flaming vengeance, taking vengeance on flaming fire, all those who believe not Jesus. If, in fact, Jesus is the only modality to salvation for our eternity, shouldn't God give more direct evidence by directly appearing to each of us? Isn't it fundamentally unfair, for instance, for, as many Christians have said, my mother, an Auschwitz survivor, miserable life, dies and winds up in hell?
I'm not sure. Perhaps, Eddie, you've been asleep at the wheel of your...
Yeah, this is, Bahnsen's pretty great here.
The Christian claim is precisely that God has made direct appearance to us, and he's done so in any number of ways. First of all, He has done so in every single one of your sensory experiences that you try to appeal to or to make intelligible in your reasoning. He does so because without his existence, you cannot make sense of the inductive principle by which you reason from past experience to the future. I'll rebut your answer in a minute, so I don't wish to be unfair to you, but what I'm getting at is that God hasn't left himself without a witness. He testifies to you in the very fact that you're trying to reason and debate tonight and to reason in a uniform fashion. God has appeared in the person of his Son, Jesus Christ. That's the Christian claim. We can get into that later. But to say, why doesn't God directly appear, is to miss the whole point. God has directly appeared. You wish to know about the fundamental fairness of God. The strange thing about that question is that within the worldview of atheism, where all reality is matter in motion, there is no fundamental fairness about anything.
Yeah.
That there are no ethical notions whatsoever. There's just matter in motion. Things happen, and that's all there is to it. And so for an atheist to try to raise a moral consideration against God is itself contradictory. It's to give up your worldview, presume on mine for a while to get an idea of fairness, and then turn around and try to use that against my worldview as well. God is fundamentally fair because he has given abundant evidence to all men.
So don't we always say this, that and Van Til had said this too, was it Bahnsen? I can't remember now. There are no atheists. There's simply people who deny the existence of God, and that you actually presuppose God in order to deny him. Maybe it was Bahnsen that says you got to climb up in God's lap to slap him. So this is, well, what does that mean? It's the idea that, exactly as Bahnsen said, you're going to borrow all of our principles that only make sense, can be justified within our paradigm, and then come back and actually try to refute our paradigm.
Yeah, exactly.
So Bahnsen's pointing that out.
Right.
Right now.
And their use of science and their use of morality and their understanding of human dignity, God has made himself abundantly clear to all men, and God will not, according to the teaching of Scripture, send anybody to hell for not knowing better.
Thank you, Dr. Bahnsen. Dr. Bahnsen, you may ask Mr. Tabash a question.
Mr. Tabash,
Here we go. This will be an excellent specimen of cross-examination. Of course, in debates, we all know cross-examination is the best part of the debate. So pay attention to the precise, quick, to the point, and just knock down arguments that Bahnsen will ask here.
in your opening presentation at one point, you challenged God to appear and to make himself known right now.
And I'm glad for your sake, because if he did appear, it wouldn't be just an academic matter for you. But I have a question about that. If you don't meet my challenge approach to things. Now, I'm just going to ask you to reason in a consistent way. If God exists, deal with this as a hypothesis. I know you don't at this point affirm it. But if God exists, would it be reasonable, would it be true to his nature as God, as sovereign, as the one who has final authority and so forth, would it be true to the nature of God to submit to your authority and say, you lay down tests for me, let me prove myself to you, and then finally, oh, thank you, you'll believe in me? Wouldn't he be God if he submitted to that kind of test?
Dr. Bahnsen.
Absolutely. And the reason why I say that is because...
By the way, that was the wrong part. I thought Bahnsen was doing this at a different point, but we'll go with this.
if I am expected to believe in this entity...
Wait, that was the kind of point that I made.
It was, yeah.
That,
I thought it was...
only fools and demons require arbitrary things to satisfy your demands.
Yeah, I thought this was a different point in the debate.
Turn these stones into bread.
Yeah. Do what I say and I'll believe you.
Absolutely. And the reason why I say that is because if I am expected to believe in this entity, then this entity, in fairness, that has so much power compared to me, assuming that it exists, would be morally obligated to recognize my dilemma in lack of perception and to give me a concrete sign. This entity, with its omniscience, would have the knowledge to know that with all my struggles in this world, with all my struggles with science and philosophy, I have not been able to see this being, and it would understand that it has to make a greater demonstration of its existence. And so if God created us, now using your hypothesis, if your God exists and is supposedly a God of mercy, then the very act of mercy would entail a manifestation of its being to us so that we could have concrete proof, particularly since, and I still will fight about this, but I still read the New Testament as providing eternal punishment for those who do not accept the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I'm saying if that's the stakes, if even the finest, most selfless people in the world wind up in some kind of eternal punishment if they reject the gospel of Jesus, which I think is fundamentally unfair to do to them, but if that is how it is set up, then I absolutely believe that that God is required to give concrete, manifested evidence of its existence so that we do not make that fatal eternal mistake. If the stakes are so high, then I think that God is incumbent upon us to show itself. And if it were not so, then God should not have implanted in me the reasoning facility to look this way. If it's not so, God should not have designed my mind in such a way that my questioning of the God's fairness leads me to this doubt.
By the way, isn't this always my kind of funny meme argument? If God exists, why so dumb and ugly?
Yeah, right. If God exists, why Hot Pocket burn? Yeah. By the way, people are. I haven't heard the KGB Dugan thing in a long time, so yes, I drew an icon. This is an official icon in the Discord that we pray to. It's the Hail Dugan icon that I just drew for you guys. So yes, confirmation. You guys can expose me now.
Boss, would you ask Dr. Bahnsen a question?
Okay. Dr. Bahnsen, you didn't exactly answer my question last time, and I choose to repeat it about the biblical claims in the book of Thessalonians, book of Romans, in the book of John, only saying that those who believe in Jesus Christ will have everlasting life. What about all the Auschwitz survivors, like members of my family, who chose...
Here we go. I'm gonna set you up and trap you with a poor emotional-based argument, right? Oh, so you're saying that all of my ancestors are dead and are damned. That's not fair.
Not to believe in Jesus or any God after that experience. What about the sincere Buddhist monks who simply have said, yes, I've looked at Christianity, but I choose not to be? Will my mother, an Auschwitz survivor, will the Dalai Lama...
I think that really Tabash doesn't get the point of the argument. The point of the argument is to ask, what is your basis for this fairness that you keep appealing to? Right? You want to keep appealing to this higher notion of what you think is fair, that's going to judge all of these situations, going to judge God even. I want to know where you get this standard and on what grounds, on what basis, right? How do you know what is and isn't fair in this atheist paradigm?
Lama, will the Buddhists all over the world, will the sincere atheists,
and it also
will they all wind...
what Bahnsen had brought up earlier, that Bahnsen admitted God's not going to be, you're not going to hell because you just missed facts and you didn't have enough evidence.
Yeah, exactly. That's what Tabash is misunderstanding, right?
That's not in the Christian doctrine.
Right. You didn't master your syllogisms from Aristotle, so you're going to hell.
Wind up in hell, or what will be the fate of all of us who really say, you know, I simply cannot buy into this and I reject the gospel of Jesus Christ as being mythology? Will we, because the Bible says so, wind up being damned?
The answer is yes, you will. Let's explore that just for a
I
minute.
like how he was expecting Bahnsen to like weasel out of it and try to water it down, and I like the bluntness, right? Yeah, I don't know why the audio quality just suddenly changed to like a. It went from Bahnsen talking like this to Bahnsen on helium. So I apologize.
For a moment. In a sense, this question is really a version of the challenge that you offered in your opening statement.
Probably
If God doesn't appear to me right now, if he doesn't accept my challenge, then I'm not going to believe, and so forth. When you ask, now what will God do when people reject the evidence that he's given of himself, do not live according to his character, will not accept his offers of mercy, and so forth, and despise him altogether and live unto themselves as though they were God, as though they could issue challenges to him and say, you meet my criteria, let me play God, and then I'll let you be God after I'm satisfied. When people reject the obvious evidence of God's existence, and it's a rational necessity to believe in him, to use morality, to engage in scientific inference, and so forth, when people do that, then, of course, God will be true to his own character. He will say in the end, you will not determine the final end of things. I will determine them by my own character. If the doctrine of hell is not true, then God is not true to his character. Because God says, those who will be with me must emulate my character. They must be like me. Now, of course, he is under obligation to show what he is like, and he has done so. He's done so pervasively. He's done so, as the Apostle Paul says, in a way that cannot be avoided by any man. And it's only for that reason that Christian theology teaches that those who end up going to hell do so by their own perverse choice.
Right.
Now, if God were to say, I'm going to create people, and even though they, in the face of obvious evidence, despise my character, live unto themselves, and I'm just going to let them come to heaven anyway, God is basically saying, they don't have to be like me. My character really means nothing. He's saying, I despise you. You have chosen to reject me. Now, I hope you don't continue to do so, Mr. Tabash, but for the moment, if you reject God, and then he says, you're going to live with me for eternity, then he's basically saying, I'll not respect your wishes. Thank you.
We'll move to the third phase of segment one, which will culminate segment one, and we will now have Dr. Bahnsen's 7-minute rebuttal.
I think this is what I was thinking of. This is the section where Bahnsen really just annihilates him.
By way of rebuttal of what you've heard from Mr. Tabash so far in our evening's debate, about all Mr. Tabash has demonstrated is that he personally does not like the Christian God.
This is it.
But we really have to ask, please do so, no matter what side of this issue you're on. The fact that he's told you he doesn't like things in the Bible and he doesn't think this is right and so forth, how in any way is that philosophically relevant to our debate?
Yeah.
That's what I want to know.
Right.
How is it at all relevant that Mr. Tabash doesn't like the Christian God? Now, it would be relevant to the debate if his implicit assumption is this: if I don't like something, then it doesn't exist. But that would be intellectually childish, wouldn't it? Kind of like the child who gets angry at his restrictive father and pulls the covers up over his head and says, you don't exist because I don't like you. Or throws a temper tantrum because he doesn't like spinach in his experience. And so if spinach doesn't exist, I mean, do we really think that way? Do we assume that because we don't like something about God, that he can't be God? Well, if we don't assume that, then actually most of the time Mr. Tabash took was wasted.
Yep.
Because all he's told us is a piece of autobiography. Ooh. He doesn't like God.
This is a devastating critique.
I also think, by the way, that he's greatly misjudged and distorted what God says in the Bible. I mean, you present these little events out of context, they're not telling the whole story. He tries to make God look like a real meanie. But, I mean, that's a standard thing. Criminals never think the police have done fair by them. And Mr. Tabash is a criminal in the universe, and when he talks about God, he's going to make him out to be a meanie. There's no doubt about that. You see, the point is, there are people in this world that I don't happen to like one bit. I'm sorry to admit that. I try to love everybody. But there are some people who are real asses, you know? But is the fact that I don't like them one bit affect their reality? is, okay, you don't exist because I don't like you. I mean, that's about all you've heard, and that's just not philosophically cogent or sound. In the tabloid that was passed out about the debate tonight, Mr. Tabash is quoted in a way that is similar to something he said in the debate already. He says, if the God of the Bible actually exists, I want to sue him for negligence for being asleep at the wheel of the universe when my grandfather and uncle were gassed to death at Auschwitz. And let me, before I deal with you as a philosopher, deal with you as a person. I think it's tragic that that happened, and I don't want you to think for a minute that it's just a matter of playing debate games that we talk about this. But since you've raised it, I want to respond to that. You have to understand that if the God of the Bible does not exist, you have lost all principled moral complaint about what Hitler did to your relatives. In a godless universe, what one animal does to another animal is ethically irrelevant. For you see, there is no rational basis for moral indignation or outrage in a godless universe. There is no moral obligation. What happens in a world where it's matter in motion just happens, period. You see, we're left on the atheist conception. We're left with Mr. Tabash's feelings.
Yeah, exactly. This was the point you were making, right?
Yeah.
Did you want to comment on that?
Well, yeah, it's just all that could be said is I'm having an emotional reaction.
Right.
And you can't even say if the emotional reaction's good or bad.
Exactly.
Because there's no odds.
Yeah. By the way, Father Deacon is not drunk, you guys. It's just the audio.
Am I bro body?
Yeah, a little bit. It's but you're like you're coming through like this.
You guys. I've gone. What was it from Goonies?
By the way, this is Father Drinking, not Father Deacon. Father Drinking Ananias, man.
Hey, you guys.
It does sound like Chuck. Hey, you guys. Hey, Bahnsen and Tabash. All right.
Feelings, pardon me, and desires. We're left with his feelings versus the feelings and desires of, say, a Hitler. And neither one of them, in a godless universe, have any more rights than the other. Indeed, as a staunch defender of liberalism and a supporter of personal freedom, Tabash really should, in terms of his atheist worldview, defend Hitler's freedom to do whatever he wanted to do. In a godless world, might makes right. Hitler had the might to kill your relatives, and you have no complaint with that. Of course, you really do have a complaint. You refuse to see the foundation of that. I have a complaint, and you should join me in making that complaint based on the character of God. My main point here is that moral absolutes do not comport with a materialistic view of the universe, the atheist view of the universe. It makes no objective sense to call Hitler evil if this is a godless universe. I mean, a certain bag of biological stuff that is subject to the laws of chemistry and physics did certain things to other bags of biological stuff on the atheist universe. There's no moral consideration here at all. Mr. Tabash has used what is often called in philosophy of religion the problem of evil against the Christian worldview. But he has to understand that in order to use that argument from evil, he must first be able to show that his own judgments about the existence of evil are meaningful, which is precisely what his unbelieving worldview cannot do. Logically speaking, the question is how the atheist can make sense of taking evil seriously, not simply as something inconvenient, not simply as something unpleasant, not simply as something contrary to your desires. The moral indignation which we feel about Auschwitz and other kinds of evil in this world just doesn't comport with theories of ethics which atheists espouse, theories which prove to be arbitrary or subjective or relativistic in character upon analysis.
Yeah, that's the point here, right, is that, there's so much in the atheist worldview, moral posturing, right, and virtue signaling, It's always appeals to not fair, mean God, I don't like it, blah, 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 blah. And then they turn around and make all of these moral absolute claims. And the point is that they don't have a justification for doing that, right? Because they've just negated the possibility of objective moral standards, absolutes, value judgments, ethics by their presuppositions, by their materialist paradigm. So it's just a total, like, inconsistent double think move that they do here.
Usually, atheists try to argue that evil is based on human reasoning and human choices, and thus, in the final analysis, it's relative to the individual.
By the way, it's Sloth, not Chunk. Chunk is the fat kid. Sloth is the big guy.
Oh, that's right.
Sloth is the big, beautiful slow boy.
When the atheist professes that people determine ethical values for themselves, rather than having them based on the absolute unchanging character of God, who's made himself known to all men, the atheist implicitly holds that those who commit evil are not really doing anything evil, given the values that they have chosen for themselves. Given the values chosen by Hitler, who can complain? He didn't do anything evil. The atheist must secretly rely upon the Christian worldview in order to make sense of his argument against God based on Auschwitz and other things of that nature. That is to say, anti-theism presupposes theism in order to even make its case. The problem of evil, you see, is a logical problem for the unbeliever, not for the believer.
Thank you, Dr. Bahnsen. Mr. Tabash, will you now give us your 7-minute rebuttal?
Well, with all due respect, I believe that it is Dr. Bahnsen who is just being autobiographical. The only thing is rather than his personal sense of what should and shouldn't be, he is using an ancient book which to me is filled with great moral flaws and also has no evidentiary basis for belief. Now, Dr. Bahnsen says that without God, I have no basis for the moral complaint against Hitler. I submit that with God, I have an even greater moral basis because there is an even larger problem, and that is how can an omniscient, omnipotent being that is supposed to be full of mercy and justice sit by while innocent people to the millions are tortured and gassed to death by Nazi Germany. And so not only that, but if you compound that horror with the fact that the decent people who were the victims of that Holocaust are supposed to, after going through the Holocaust, go into an eternal Holocaust because they didn't accept Jesus, you have the most monstrous conception of God. Now, if I have, or if we as human beings, according to Dr. Bahnsen and other Christian theists, have the intelligence to, in their view, apprehend and understand that the Bible reveals such great moral truths, I submit that we also have the intelligence to see beyond the illusion, to wake up from the myth and superstition and say, hey, wait a minute, what is this God that takes so many decent millions of people and just because they didn't pray the right way or pray through the right figure, the right intermediary, they wind up eternally damned? What is this God who opens the pit of hell to all those who simply adopted the wrong theology or sincerely adopted no theology? This is not a God that many of us want to worship. And if God is the designer of the intellectual capacities that we all used to analyze issues of philosophy, then God is also unavoidably the designer of the thought processes in mind.
So the idea here of there being no secondary causal relations, or that we aren't actual agents, right? So in other words, the fact that we possess faculties does not mean that we will always use those faculties in the right way, right? I mean, I can have thought processes that, or I can have an intellectual train of reasoning that's a misuse of reasoning, That doesn't mean that God is responsible for my misuse of the reasoning faculties that he gave me. So this is a weird, so because God created humans and they have a reasoning faculty, if I reason wrongly and come to the conclusion through my reason that there is no God, God is responsible for me coming to that conclusion. But Bahnsen's point is that that is a misuse of reason and therefore a misuse of the tool, right? Be like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a weird example. Like, if my dad was the judge of this town and he gave me a shotgun and then I used the shotgun to shoot the judge, it's the judge's fault because I inherited his shotgun.
Exactly.
I mean, what? That's a bizarre line of argument here.
In my head, which lead me to reject the Christian God of the Bible. And so what kind of an impossibly ridiculous being is this to plant in my head the seeds of rejection, knowing that he plans for me eternal punishment because I have exercised.
Yeah, see, this is a weird line of argument. I don't know if I've ever heard another atheist make this argument. So I'll give Bahnsen or Tabash 1 point for having a unique argument, because usually they just repeat all the other terrible atheist arguments. But I mean, it's not a good argument, but it's at least a unique argument. I don't think it follows. It's a non sequitur. But I've never heard this line of argument that if my reasoning is what leads me to conclude that there's no God, that's God's fault because he gave me reasoning. What do you think of this line of argument?
That was a great analogy. I like the analogy. Yeah. My father, the judge, gave me a gift, and I did something bad with it, so it's Daddy's fault.
Yeah.
The rejection
Daddy.
for which he.
Daddy, why did you give me this shotgun? Daddy, it's not my fault.
Inclined me in the
Daddy, if you didn't want me to shoot you, shouldn't give me the gun.
first way by the way my thought processes have been composed. This is a very cynical, dangerous being that makes many of us in such a way that we sincerely can't accept certain postulates and then tosses us into a lake of fire for eternity because we followed those very inclinations which he, the Christian God, itself, placed in us. This is not a God that's worthy of believing, and it's not a question of whether Dr. Bahnsen's autobiography or my autobiography prevail. It's a question of when human beings collectively look at and analyze what it means by morality.
Yeah, so notice that big mistake there. Where do we get our morals? Human beings collectively analyze and come to moral conclusions.
Yeah.
That is a appeal to the masses fallacy. So,
yeah.
Have you noticed how?
So why were the Germans wrong for? Didn't they collectively come together and make some moral decisions?
Isn't it amazing how atheists don't care at all about fallacies? They just charge through. They just make fallacy, and they want to turn around and say that atheism is the rational, logical position, when they literally just spew out fallacies, don't even care. They just charge past it. You point it out to them, they don't care.
We do have some independent right to assess a situation for ourselves. If the God of the Bible had not stayed the hand of Abraham, and if the God of the Bible had made Abraham kill his son Isaac unto an offering, I think that we should be able to say that that was wrong. When God instructed the ancient Israelites...
This is if it had gone the other way, God would have been wrong. This is a terrible line of argument. This reminds me of the approach of JF, right? Like, well, what if there's a universe where there's a computer and it operates on its own and it doesn't have a God? So isn't that possible? So therefore, there's no God. I mean, these lines of argument that they love these like thought experiments, which you can use a thought experiment But a thought experiment is not an argument against another paradigm. I mean, do you see what I'm saying? Maybe you could state this better, because you have a really good modal approach to that question of, like, you know, refuting materialism. Like, what would you say to an atheist, Father Deacon, who said, well, if I can come up with thought experiments about possible worlds where XYZ happens, then doesn't that prove that God's not necessary?
Well, what they're getting mixed up on is, and this is one of the critiques, and you have to be very careful with possible worlds and modal arguments. You believe that you're conceiving, so the idea of like a modal argument, if I can conceive of a situation in which there's no contradiction,
Right,
then it's possible.
right.
Okay, so now the problem is your conceivability is often not a good guide to logical possibility.
Exactly, that's a good point. And also conceivability,
a retort and say that, like, you're not conceiving properly, because that's actually a logical. God is logically necessary in every possible world.
right.
So the fact that you think that you can conceive, the error is in your part. You're not conceiving properly, and therefore, as we philosophers say, in that situation, your conceivability is not a good guide to logical possibility.
That's a good point. And also, conceivability does not mean actuality. But in fact, believe it or not, the atheists who go down the road of the multiverse literally confuse conceivability now with actuality, right? So they will literally think that there actually is a universe somewhere where there's no God, and there's computers that run on their own because of my multiverse and my magical quantum BS that, right, is my replacement for God.
It's to wipe out to the last breathing person every Hittite without taking into account the innocent children among them to be spared. I think that was a problem. I think that if Sodom and Gomorrah story is true, that it is not possible that there wasn't some innocent children in either of those two cities.
Right.
Jay, we should do this one. We should use his fallacy against him. Well, we now know that there were no innocent Hittites.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
Who didn't deserve to survive, even if the adults were irremediably wicked. I also think, and again showing the absurdity of biblical mythology, that it was very cruel of God to turn Lot's wife into a pillar of salt merely for looking back at Sodom and Gomorrah. Particularly
and the whole point of that story isn't that she's turned to a pillar of salt because she physically turned around. It's because the looking back was, in fact, her desire to go back to that wicked place.
That's the big sin. You're never supposed to turn around.
Yeah, God condemns anyone who turns their head around.
What a stupid argument.
I mean, all owls
are
going to hell.
Don't ever turn around.
Did you know all owls are automatically hellbound?
Yeah.
There's a poor woman on a low sodium diet. So I think that when you look at the fact that the types of supernatural absurdities which occur in the Bible would be believed in no...
This is as the chat's pointing out, I mean, these are arguments that are like, used by rebellious teenagers on Reddit. So notice that the quality of the argumentation from the atheists has not changed from the 1980s all the way up until today on Reddit. It's the same quality. This is the academic atheist realm, by the way. This is not some random dude. Not much difference there.
Yeah, this is some Twitter atheist.
Right.
Context. But there is a kind of sui generis modality of suspended credulity that comes to the Bible, that we compartmentalize the normal analytic process.
Well, maybe the fact that many of us have a reverence for the Bible and we suspend our normative judgments of other texts like we do, the way we judge any other text like the Bible, is because the Bible's true. Maybe there's actual things about the Bible that suggest and point to its inspiration and inerrancy, such as the messianic prophecies, the dozens and dozens of them. Maybe that's why we come to the Bible with a different approach, a different presupposition, that it's not like any other text that is in fact unique.
That we use to confront and to deal
the restroom, and I'll be right back.
Okay.
with every other facet of the human condition, but that when it comes to the Bible, we suspend our rational analytic capacity and accept the most outrageous fairy tales and horror stories as actual truth, which we would not do in any other context. It tells us something, and it gives us a legitimate basis for doubt. It would be more appealing to believability if those things set forth in the Bible were the types of phenomena which we saw manifested in all other areas of human life. If supernatural events were a daily occurrence, if the appearance of angels and supernatural beings were something that accompanied our daily experience, that is something that would make the Bible more believable. But to say that in an empirical universe, that the only exception to the standard laws we live with every day is the biblical account of truth, I think is a very, very weak argument. And so I submit that the evil supernaturalism of divine retribution for failure to pray the right way is an anathema to justice, and that this God does not, in fact, exist.
Thank you, Mr. Tabash. We will now have a 3-minute intermission.
Saved. But he that believeth
Well, she
not
used the restroom during the 3-minute intermission, right?
Right.
shall be damned. Now, I have a problem with that. And my problem with that is that there is no proof the gospel wasn't even written until with Jesus. And that would negate the Christian concept of God.
I'm skipping because he just repeats his opening
Thank you,
statement.
Mr. Tabash. Dr. Bahnsen, may we now have your 10-minute opening statement.
I have a great appreciation for my opponent's feistiness, that he wants to continue to show, he has this sharp tongue and can issue these challenges to God and so forth. But I am still waiting for proof of the kind of, things that he just throws out there on his own authority, that there can't be a hell because of this reason. He can superimpose his values and so forth. I want you to notice something.
Yeah, did you see what Bahnsen's doing there? He's just simply pointing out that Tabash hasn't really leveled an argument yet. He's given us a lot of reasons why he doesn't like things, but that's not an argument. And Bahnsen is correct to call that out. And he says that he's talked about how he's superimposed his values on the Christian system to say it's not fair, but we're asking him to account for his morals and his ethics and his atheist worldview.
What's going on in the debate here tonight. In the first place, Mr. Tabash has not yet understood the challenge that's been directed to him. He has very little time left to deal with it. I hope that he'll use it when it does come. In my opening remarks, I pointed out that the inductive principle needs a rational foundation, and that we use the inductive principle when we reason, when we engage in discourse, when we do anything to make our experience intelligible. Everything Mr. Tabash has been saying tonight, all of his reasoning, all of his argumentation, fallacious or not, all of it has assumed the inductive principle, that there's a uniformity in nature. That is not the design argument. So I hope that he gets to the debate tonight.
Yeah, so, right. Bahnsen is restating the argument he made about induction, the transcendental argument he made, and pointing out that that is not the teleological argument. He did not make the design argument. And so as long as Tabash is going to respond to an argument that he didn't make, he hasn't shown up to the debate yet.
Tonight and catches up with what's going on, because no one is arguing the teleological argument tonight. Your opponent is arguing that those who argue against the teleological argument and those who argue in favor of it, those who argue against God and those who argue for God. Everyone who argues assumes the uniformity of nature in the inductive principle, and we haven't been given a rational foundation for that. In fact, the inductive principle is contrary to the atheist view of the universe. So atheists continue to reason, continue to draw on past experience, and to draw conclusions from past connections and that sort of thing, and yet they have no basis for believing that they have the right to do that. I'm just waiting for an explanation. It hasn't been given. When you appeal to sensory experience, you beg the question. By the way, better atheist philosophers than Mr. Tabash have already pointed that out. Hume and Bertrand Russell both pointed out you can't appeal to experience to prove the uniformity of nature. Why? Because the appeal to experience already assumes the uniformity of nature. Now,
so we can already see that, like, Tabash is way out of his league. Okay. He's arguing with somebody who has actual philosophical training, by the way, and isn't just a random professor, but an actually good thinker and one of the best debaters. And I hope you can see that this is just a blowout, right? I mean, it's again, Tabash hasn't even shown up to the debate yet. He hasn't even entered the ring. He doesn't even know, like, that he's getting hit from both sides in this debate. I mean, it's like Tyson versus, I don't know, like Glass Joe, right? And if you remember, Mike Tyson's punts out, like, the Glass Joe is like the first guy, you hit him one time and he goes down. I mean, the debate was over a long time ago, and Tabash doesn't even know. Would you agree?
Exactly right.
Now, as you consider the background worldviews of atheism or Christian theism, I want you to observe that the life of the atheist is riddled with inconsistency and thus is exposed as being utterly irrational. Atheists will presuppose human dignity and attend the funeral of a friend or to honor a relative, even a child with Down syndrome, but then they will turn around and argue that man has no dignity, he is no different than any other product of evolution, like a snail or a dog or a horse. I don't see how they bring these two things together. The atheist will insist that man is nothing more than a complex of biochemical factors controlled by the laws of physics. And yet he kisses his wife and his children when he goes home, as though there is something called love that each of us share in the family. The atheist will argue that in sexual relations, anything goes. There are no moral absolutes. Don't impose your views on others. He'll even defend prostitution, but then indignantly condemn child molesters or morally repudiate necrophilia. You see, the atheist is just a bundle of contradictions. He can't bring his worldview into harmony with itself.
There you go. That was just a simple, like, three-point utter demolishing of the incoherence and nonsense of the atheist paradigm. And all Bahnsen did, by the way, was he realized, I think, that the opponent in the audience wasn't really philosophically astute enough to understand the point about induction, and so he just brought it down to an easier level, at the level of ethics, which most people can make sense of, and just said, look, what do we get?
That's what's good about this. That's what's actually really nice about this debate. So on the Stein was a little bit more erudite.
Right.
What's nice about this is that, and it just shows the kind of resilience of Bahnsen, is that he's able to boil it all down to a common level that everybody can understand while still presenting the transcendental presuppositional argument approach.
Yeah, Bahnsen just said, right, 3 easy points here to show the irrationality and inconsistency and incoherency of the atheist worldview. How is there human dignity when there is no dignity because we're just a bag of atoms? How is there love, quote unquote, that is actually meaningful when we're also just a bag of atoms? How is it the case that anything goes, but also, by the way, don't rape or abuse my relatives? You see, it doesn't work. It's arbitrary. It's inconsistent. It's incoherent.
He'll suggest that things which happen in the universe happen randomly. It just is that way, arbitrarily. Talk about primitive thinking. That's far more primitive than anything you can find, even in the time the Bible was written.
Yeah, See, this is another good point, right? This is the point that Bahnsen and Van Til often made about the appeal to the universe as ultimately completely irrational, at the same time as also completely rational and governed by meaningful laws and logic and so forth. Those two things can't be true at once. Either the universe is completely irrational and chaotic and meaningless, or it's governed by laws, rules, it's inherently meaningful and structured. Right? You can't have it both ways, but every atheist flips back and forth between those two incommensurate paradigms to try to argue his incoherent position.
Just happened. But then he'll turn around and he looks for regularities and law-like explanations of events. He looks for uniformity and predictability in the things that he studies in natural science. You see, the atheist doesn't have a workable worldview. He may go on and on autobiographically about how he doesn't like the God of the Bible and doesn't like the doctrine of hell and all that, but he doesn't have a workable worldview in terms of which to reason in the first place, to argue at all. And he exposes its weaknesses at every turn in his life. You see, you can claim that there is nothing spiritual, nothing immaterial, nothing abstract and universal, that only concrete particular things exist. You can claim that events are just random, that there's no personal plan or control or purpose in the universe. You can claim that reality amounts to nothing more but matter in motion. But you can't act or reason in that way.
Yeah.
And as long as Mr. Tabash continues to reason, as long as he continues to assume the uniformity of past experience with what he's saying now, what conclusions he draws scientifically, how he makes his experience intelligible, he's not living in terms of his own assertion about the nature of reality. We have to ask the atheist, why should you be rational? I mean, if man doesn't have a mind, he's just, just has a brain that's subject to the laws of chemistry and physics, then there is no objective reasoning, and there's no freedom, actually, for us to consider evidence in an argument and choose one way or another. Just like weeds grow, so the mind of man does whatever it does by the laws of physics. We have to ask the atheist, where is the origin of life? On the evolutionary hypothesis, we are led to the irrational view that life spontaneously generated. And yet science today, all of biological science, proceeds on the opposite assumption. That spontaneous generation is wrong, as a matter of fact. No matter how much you tinker or work with a cake mix, you're not going to get the cake mix to make a political constitution. No matter how much you tinker with the cake mix, you're not going to get it to make a dream of a spring day. Why is that? Because the elements of a cake mix have nothing to do with what we're talking about when we talk about political constitutions and dreams and so forth. These are different kinds of things. Similarly, inorganic matter doesn't, by a mechanical reconfiguration, give rise to organic things. That kind of thinking is mythical. It's going back to the days of alchemy.
Oh, right. My primordial soup. My magical lightning struck the primordial soup and it created the magical consciousness in the monkeys.
What's amazing, and you and I pointed out this too, it's devolving back into mythology.
It is, of course. It's
the mythos, the story, like it's literally storytelling.
Yeah, exactly. There's no difference between this mythology of the rise of consciousness and the mythology of the Greeks that one of the Titans tripped and dropped a lightning bolt and it hit the ground and it created man. It's the same. I'm not joking. They literally have the same myth.
But that's what the atheist worldview leaves us with. We don't know why we should be rational. We can't understand the origin of life. On the atheist worldview, why should we think in terms of scientific inference? This is what I keep driving at. If you're a materialist, there is no uniformity in nature. There is no answer to human skepticism, in which case the atheist can't assert anything, even that he doesn't like God. Why should we be moral in terms of the atheist universe? On a naturalistic principle, there is no right or wrong. There's just might. There's just what happens. You can't find obligatory authority anywhere in the world if it's just matter in motion. You see, the atheist just cannot answer the tough questions of philosophy. He cannot make intelligent...
And by the way, if you'll notice, what are the atheists that we've shared on Twitter in the last week saying? That very thing. Do not do philosophy. Philosophy is dangerous. philosophy of science doesn't exist. Avoid philosophy. That's literally what they say now.
Yeah.
Because they have been presented with these dilemmas, Dawkins, for 20, 30 years now? And not only can he not answer them, he's literally saying, get rid of the philosophers. Like, kill them, right? Don't have the philosophers anymore. They're dangerous. Why is that? Because he can't answer the...
Well, isn't this my point? Yeah, it's my point in my recent paper, right? Why it's a religious cult. It's
right.
Scientism, and it must conceal and hide the untruth that doesn't fit under what they call science. Now, remember, philosophy is synonymous with thinking. And so what they're basically saying, this is how you know it's a cult, a religious cult, get rid of the thinkers. It's like Pol Pot, right?
Yeah.
Kill all the people with glasses, right? Because they're obviously going to be reading. Get rid of the thinkers because they're the people that are going to expose our swindle.
Yeah. Because what was the original point, right? That man suppresses the truth, and you were perceptive to note that, right? About the modus operandi of the atheist in this debate is actually to do precisely that. Like let me just phrase it like it's just a hypothetical question. If the Bible is false, how come Paul's so adequate in his psychological explanation of the atheist, right? Doesn't Romans 1 perfectly fit the MO of what Tabash is doing here? I just think that's interesting.
Eligible use of his rationale.
Go ahead.
Oops. Yeah, it froze for a second here. So disconnected. Hold on.
Connected to iPhone.
This way. That is to say, he wants to be arbitrary. Well, if you're going to be arbitrary, don't bother to debate. Just say, I'm going to say whatever I want to say.
Yeah, right. So the modus operandi of the atheist at this point is to be arbitrary. And once a person is being arbitrary in a debate, you've won because you just call that out and you point out that right, everybody knows you can't just be arbitrary in a debate because if you could, you couldn't have a debate.
Or sometimes atheists will say, no answer is possible to those deep philosophical questions. No one can know for sure. Of course, that's self-contradictory, isn't it? If no one can know for sure, then how do you know that no one can know for sure? Basically, what atheists end up saying is that, well, everybody knows nature is uniform. Everybody knows there's moral absolutes.
This is, by the way, what every classical foundationalist does, too, to justify their principles, right, which can't be justified. How do we justify them? Well, everybody knows that there's a principle of causation. We all know that there's teleology.
He knows these things. And you know what? On that point, I agree with the atheist. Everybody does know these things. But the problem is they don't comport with atheism.
Yep.
These things that people know very well, the continuing evidence that you need a Christian theistic worldview to make sense out of experience, these things don't comport with atheism. Key philosophical questions are answered by atheists arbitrarily and inconsistently, in a way which can't make sense out of ordinary human experience and reasoning. And atheists try to hide this gaping defect in their theorizing from themselves, but it's not being hid from you tonight. I want you to consider a parallel. A person who were to come tonight and argue no air exists continues to breathe air, doesn't he, while he argues. And when I point out that if, as he says, no air exists, he couldn't be breathing, it would be intellectually inept for him to respond, no, you're wrong to say my theory implies I couldn't be breathing, because in fact I am breathing. You see, he would be so self-deluded that he wouldn't catch the significance of the fact that the facts belie his theory. And the facts, the most common facts of life, inductive reasoning, scientific conclusions, moral judgments, making experience intelligible, belie the theory of atheism. Intellectually speaking, atheists continue to breathe. I know that. They continue to reason, to be scientific, to make moral judgments. I don't doubt that. But the atheistic view of things would, in theory, make such breathing impossible, would render science arbitrary, logic impossible, and ethics nonsense. Atheists work hard to hide this intellectual poverty from themselves. That's why they look up verses in the Bible and try to ridicule things, rather than getting down to the basic issue of, do you have a philosophy of life in terms of which you can reason about anything at all? And they pretend, philosophically speaking, that they're not breathing God's air all the time. They're arguing against Him.
Yes.
The Apostle Paul in Acts 17 said to the philosophers in ancient Greece, in Him, in God, we live and move and have our existence. You see, God is the very atmosphere of our lives.
Thank you, Dr.
He's the
Bahnsen.
intellectual precondition of all of our rationality and all of our morality.
Thank you, Dr. Bahnsen.
So I'm going to leave it there. If you want to hear the rest of this debate, you can go over to the link that I have in the show description for the next hour or so. But I'll go ahead and tell you that all Tabash does is restate his opening statement. So there's not much else of substance there. But really a pretty clear knockdown. And I thought I would throw in this tweet response that I did to Dawkins as well, which he was getting a lot of traction out of this tweet where he says, science is not a social construct. Science's truths were true before there were any societies. Science's truths will be true after philosophers are dead. We were true before there were any philosophers before any philosophers were born, and after all philosophers are dead, science will still be true. Interesting. So the eternality, invariance, and immateriality.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
Right. I mean, look at this.
There's plenty of religious connotations in that. I think there's actually,
and people were a lot of people called him out on this, right? So I said, so truth is eternal and invariant and immaterial and not subject to change. That's doing philosophy, Mr. D. So he doesn't even know he's doing philosophy. Or if he does, he's suppressing that, right? And he's therefore telling people to go away from the philosophers. Don't ever listen to a philosopher. They're dangerous. Well, that's a cult. So much for reason and tolerance, right? All right. Let's get to the super chats. So we got Gen Z Philosophy, $10. Glory to Christ. I will be baptized in the Orthodox Church in 2 days on Forgiveness Sunday. Awesome. I know Gen Z's been hanging around for a while. He sent a lot of super chats, a lot of support. So really glad to hear that. I've gone from being a normie atheist college student to a red-pilled Christian senior in 4 years, in large part due to you guys' evangelizing and apologetics. Thank you. Well, there you go. So people say, don't do apologetics, don't evangelize atheists. Literally, people say that. Well, you see that, yes, debates do have an effect, and they do work. Martyrius Maximus, $5. I am to be baptized Orthodox soon. There we go. Another convert. It's great to hear. My parish is very small, but we do have a baptismal font for dunking. My bishop said pouring water on the head 3 times is valid, but I want to obey the bishop. I'm conflicted on this. I would say just follow your bishop, Father Deacon. Would you agree?
Yes.
Vel Emmanuel, $10. I'm slowly but surely trying to catch up on years of videos. Well, good. Awesome. There are 800 or 900 of those, so get to work. But thank you for that super chat, right?
Good.
I expect you to be done by this week. There's multiple choice tests at the end of the week. Billiard ball A, $3. I did not hit billiard ball B. I did not. It is BS. I did not hit her. I did not. Oh, hi, Jay. Right. So thank you, billiard ball A. And David Hume believes you. So maybe David Hume could be your lawyer to prove that billiard ball A did not hit billiard ball B. Rich, $5. Can you do a steelman of ADS? After listening to the Ortho Bros, I can't see the logic for it or why anyone would follow Aquinas or Peter Lombard. Well, I don't think we have time to do that right now. We just did a 3-hour analysis of this stuff, but I would say go to the community tab stream and you'll see the critique that I did of, or the presentation that I did from John Damascus's on the Orthodox Faith, chapter 1. So there's a 4-part talk that I did, and that covers the whole essence, energy, simplicity stuff in a pretty comprehensive way. There's not a real easy way to give their position as they see it on a super chat answer. But one thing I would say is if you want to read somebody who does an academic level critique, this is expensive. That's why I don't usually recommend it, but there's the Rada Galwitz.
expensive.
It's like $200, so you probably don't want this. But Andrew Radagowicz has a whole dissertation on the fact that the Cappadocians don't teach what the medieval Thomists do. And then, of course, there's the classic book, Aristotle, East and West by Dr. David Bradshaw, where I know he's not steel manning the position in the sense of presenting. He's just refuting the view. I mean, Father Deacon, I know that you have.
And by the way, Jay, if you pay extra, don't you get those notes in there with the stickies?
You do not. I'm sorry. Those are going on the blockchain, and they are unique pieces of art that will be sold as NFTs for $6 million very soon. But Father Deacon, you have a show coming up soon where you will be interacting with some Catholic guys and discussing this topic. So do you want to plug that?
Yeah, I'll be on, let's see, that's tomorrow, 1 p.m. Mountain Standard, on intellectual conservatism with, which is Swan's channel with Christopher T. You might know him. And they're both Roman Catholic Thomists. And it's going to be a cordial discussion about, I'm just kind of asking questions about what is our doctrine about essence and energies? Why is that response to absolute divine simplicity and various things? So I'm looking forward to that. So intellectual conservatism is the channel, 1 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Thank you, Jay.
Yep. So look for that tomorrow. Let's see. John Wayne as Genghis Khan, $15. Is there any movies that portray Orthodox Christianity well? Yes. Tarkovsky's Rublev. The movie called The Island, which is not Michael Bay's The Island. And then there's a movie about Prince Vladimir called The Viking or something like that. Those are. Who's
the guy that does the Ostrov? I'm blanking on the director.
That does what?
Ostrov, the island.
I'm not sure.
He has two other really good Orthodox films: Priest, Sans, and Tsar.
Oh, cool. Well, there you go. See, I didn't even know about those.
And then Man of God is coming out about Saint Nectarios.
Yes.
I haven't been able to find where that's being released, where we can watch that. But that's got Mickey, your old dude, friend, Mickey Rourke in it.
My old friend.
Can you believe it?
How do I have any connection?
Your old friend.
My old friend.
I'm making a
okay,
rumor.
that's funny though. Yeah, that now people, he's Hollywood connected to Mickey Rourke. I don't know anything about Mickey Rourke. Zed, $1. Lofton is trying to cancel you guys, and it's cringe. I look forward to the Gospel Simplicity interview. Yeah, I think everybody kind of saw that in the comments, and that pretty much backfired on them trying to get him to take the interview down, which is sad. But that's what they do. Stevie, $5, and he says nothing. Thank you, Stevie. Jerikia, $50. Precept Gang. Yes, this is the Precept Gang. And I hope you guys see a pretty good illustration, right, of presuppositional apologetics tonight in an overlooked Bahnsen debate that really brings it down to the practical. But thank you very much for that fat super chat. And of course, half of these super chats will go to Father Deacon. Morgan, $20. Is there any difference between your position and that of presuppositional apologetics? No. But I assume you mean the Calvinist approach. My view would be that the Calvinist approach has deficiencies when it tries to make the argument grounded in the Trinity because they have a deficient view of the Trinity. So, in fact, Maximus's metaphysic with the doctrine of the Logi is a very crucial element to how we're going to cash out the transcendental argument from my view. And so, yes, in our view, our Trinitarian apologetic is correct. The Calvinist Trinitarian apologetic is not correct, and it's precisely there that we have the better upper hand. John Hoffman, $20. Thank you, Father Deacon, and thank you, Jay. Thank you, John Hoffman. Karasu, $5. This is a noob question, but is there any biblical source or otherwise that speaks of God acting within the bounds of his nature? specifically in response to the question, can God create a rock so heavy that he can't lift? Thank you, from an Orthodox inquirer. That's okay. That's a new question. I mean, we don't think that God ever acts out of accord with his nature, right? So, for example, Paul says in Scripture, it's impossible for God to lie. So when we talk about omnipotence is going to be qualified or defined or given the meaning that it has from the Christian paradigm, right? So if the Christian paradigm is true, then we can't come up with definitions or meanings of omniscience from outside that paradigm, right? So God will condition what the meaning of omniscience and omnipotence is, right? So in that regard, omnipotence does not mean that he can do anything in an unqualified sense, right? So God can't make himself not exist, right? And so in that regard, that's what omnipotence means for us. So you can't import a foreign idea.
There's one way to think about it too. Is that to be all powerful, like omnipotent, is a positive attribute, and does not include deficiencies. So you have a category error. Am I all powerful which is a positive, to be deficient? That doesn't really kind of make sense, even the way it's worded.
Right, exactly.
It's not, in other words, in the category of power.
Yeah. Squid Sauce, $1. Jay, you keep asking for a justification for transcendentals under materialism. Don't worry about it. Anyway, how is your sex life? Yes, I'm BTFO'd. So I guess it's time to pack it up, guys. It's all over. We're done. Atheism is vindicated. Dylan, $10. Thank you for all that you guys have done. I love your videos and the Discord as well, from an inquiring Protestant who is seriously considering converting to Orthodoxy. Well, thank you very much, Dylan. Much appreciated. Hope you do convert, and we hope that you enjoy the Discord still. And by the way, after this, everybody, I will be in the Discord after this. We'll be reflecting and discussing more. If you want to come into the voice chat and Discord, if you want to come debate me, come put me in my place, come annihilate me, come smash me, come knock me down, baby. I don't know if Father Deacon will be there. He may be there. That's up to him. But I'll be in there. But thank you for that, Dylan. John, for $3. Would you consider reviewing Matt Dillahunty's recent debate on whether or not Jesus fulfilled prophecies? That's a good idea. In fact, Father Deacon and I were talking about other so-called debates to review. So I don't know who he debated on that, but I would venture to guess that Matt Dillahunty does not have a sufficient depth in exegesis to actually know what the messianic prophecies are and how many of them there are and how detailed they are. So yeah, we could definitely do that, or we could pick out a Graham Oppie debate or something like that. So yeah, we'll definitely find something like that to do next time. All right, that's all the super chats I see. Thank you guys very much. Again, come to the Discord. If you want access to the Discord, it's on the community tab on my channel right now. So I've shared it across platforms today. We had, I think, about over 100 people join the Discord today. So you can still join. Just go over to the community tab and there's the link. You have to be vetted. You have to answer the questions. And we do like for people that come in that do want to debate, you have to do it voice. Okay, so this is not a text debate. I'm not going to sit there and tap on my thumbs to debate you. You got to come to the voice debate. Father Deacon, anything you want to leave us with? I've got your channel linked. Everybody be sure and go follow Father Deacon Ananias. Anything else you want to leave us with?
God bless you guys. For all of the Orthodox Christians out there, may we enter into a good Lent. And Forgiveness Sunday for all those that have offended and sinned against. Please forgive me, brothers. I'm doing a preemptive. I know it's not Forgiveness Vespers, but and pray for your deacon, the sinner, and pray for all of you guys. And